What's the dumbest reason the cops got called to a scene? The reporting party said a pigeon was acting strangely on her deck. It wouldn't fly away. It flew away when I clapped my hands. Also had a call for 2 people riding bikes smiling suspiciously. A lady called because a cat was in her yard, not attacking anyone or anything like that. It was just in her yard. Even better is that we had to do a report every time we responded to a call, even if no citations were issued. So in my report, I put a cat as the suspect and a calico as its race. I belong to an online neighborhood board. Some woman went off because people walk their dogs and the dogs go number 2 on her lawn. We had all agreed that not cleaning up after your dog is terrible. She clarified and said that, everyone was picking up the number 2, but it was leaving germs on her lawn, so she called the police. Responded to the outside of the county jail one time, the LA County Twin Towers, and had to actually fight a guy trying to climb the fence into the jail. This might not sound like much until you realize that we had to fight a guy in order to prevent him from entering the jail, then drove around the back and put him in jail. LA is fricking weird. I was dispatched to a house in reference to a reported vandalism to a vehicle. When I got there, the guy who called was standing by his car. I saw that there was no visible damage to the vehicle. His complaint was that dust picked up by the wind was coming from his neighbor's yard and landing on his car. The guy actually wanted to file a criminal complaint. My first thought was that maybe I was dreaming this nonsense. All I could do in response was stare at him and say absolutely nothing. The guy became uncomfortable and explained his complaint again. I couldn't help but just stare at him more. At the time, I didn't think I could say anything to him that didn't sound insulting. I think he finally got it since he just went inside his house and never called us again. Well, there we go. So far, the majority of the reasons can be summarized with, the person calling the police was bored and/or lonely. It's sad, but somewhat expected. Let's see if the next story follows that trend. Hint, it does. A few years ago, when I was moving into a house, I was doing most of my moving late at night. The nosy old couple across the street kept calling the cops and reporting suspicious activity. The first time the cops showed up, they were prepared for a criminal. They had their hands on their weapons, flashlights in my eyes, but by the 4th time they just BS'd with me and my family and told the couple to stop calling the cops. I'm not sure what made the couple think burglars would bring stuff into the house instead of taking it out. Once responded to a call originating in the sheriff's department parking lot. Literally walked out of the doors into the following fustercluck. A lady had just been released from the jail and her ex-girlfriend came to pick her up, drunk on a moped. The reason it got reported is that the drunk woman was doing donuts in our parking lot waiting for her ex, lost control and rammed a police car. My training sergeant had always had a saying that ran true to that day. We don't catch the smart ones. Officer here, working 2 years in a large city. The first call that truly made me question my job choice was a disturbance between a husband and wife. Officers had been out of the house earlier in the day and the wife called 911 a second time. The wife called and said she and her husband were arguing because she wanted to do the deed but he refused because her hoo-ha stunk. It was difficult to remain professional. I was an EMT. I was called to a sick person which turned out to be a perfectly fine person that just wanted a medical checkup. And because he thought that all EMTs were doctors, we could just give him one for free since we were already there. Cop here. We have a guy in town who's a paraplegic and confined to a wheelchair. He also has a totally abrasive personality and is an all-round awful person. The county pays for a caretaker, but he either fires them or they quit because they won't cater to his unreasonable demands. He called 911 once because his trash cans didn't get moved to the curb before trash day and he wanted the cops to come do it for him. The dispatcher routed me the call. I called into dispatch and told them that I was absolutely not going out to put this guy's trash out. They ended up sending the fire department after enough cops mutinied and refused to go. Working front desk at a hotel. Customer called 911 on me because I wouldn't give him a free upgrade. My neighbor hated my Mustang. He started calling the cops on me for drag racing. No, I'm accelerating to the speed limit of 45 from a stop sign. Anyway, he started calling the cops on me when it was a pickup truck, the UPS truck, the garbage man coming by. If he heard an engine, it had to be me. I spent a couple of weeks in Germany. One night, my parents got a knock on the door. It was the cops. They had reports of me drag racing again. My parents handed the officers my keys and said, "He's been out of the country for 2 weeks. You can go feel the engine if you want." The police apologized for disrupting my parents' evening. At the apartment tower I worked security for, some Saudi royal family members called the cops because the working girl they hired took their money and ran. The cops said, "Sure, you can have the money back, but you have to admit to misdemeanor solicitation to do so." And before people ask, their cars had KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, license plates, and the Saudi royal family crest on it. Also, they admitted to what they did to the cops, so in order for the cops to take the theft report, they'd have to include the solicitation report. I'd say the cops gave them a break by just letting them all go. Soon-to-be police officer here. When I was doing an internship with the local sheriff's office, I was with one deputy and we got called out on a domestic disturbance. Before we could get there, a city police officer intercepted the call and took it, since it was just outside city limits and we were still 15 minutes away. So we continued to patrol the county when the same people called again, specifically asking for a deputy to come out to the scene. We got there, and right off the bat this woman was going on about how the city police officer was very rude to her and she wanted us to go arrest him and have him fired for unpoliceman-like conduct. That's her exact wording, by the way. I had to turn away to keep from laughing in this woman's face. She was very angry because he allegedly said the F word in front of her daughter. Keep in mind, this woman was using that word 3 or 4 times in each sentence. We pretty much told her that our department doesn't police other departments and that she should contact the chief of police and make a formal complaint. This didn't sit well with her, and she told us that we needed to leave before she called the cops on us. Again, I'm not joking. At this point, the guy I was with couldn't take it anymore and told the woman that he was arresting himself and taking himself downtown, and we left trying not to bust out laughing. If everything goes right, I'll have some more stories once I get hired by the sheriff's office. My grandma was recovering from surgery in the hospital once. She had to share the room with this senile woman. I was really young, but this woman was so memorable. Whenever she needed something, like being hungry, bed raised, whatever, she'd dial out to 911, like multiple times in an hour, because you can call 911 for help, you see? I guess eventually dispatch called the hospital and told the nurses station what was happening, and they had to go in there and talk to her about it. Hilarious, though. Well, it's just nice to have one that was based on a misunderstanding rather than the people being inherently crappy or just desperate for attention. I hope they got the old dear to understand. Oh, so many. A woman found a half-eaten sandwich in her unfenced backyard. She thinks someone threw it in there to poison her dog. She saved the sandwich and wanted us to test it for poison. A man called because his trampoline was blowing away in a windstorm. One woman called because someone stole her American flag from her front yard. One of those little tiny yard flags that are about a foot tall and you plant in your grass. She called the morning after a particularly bad and windy thunderstorm. I had to explain to her that it's much more likely that the flag blew away than someone maliciously stole a 50-cent flag. I then found it in a nearby sewer drain. Also, my dog is acting strange. Can you send a police officer? Happens way more than you'd like to think. My favorite, though, is people who call in because people are driving too fast through the neighborhoods. So we go out there and run radar. 9 times out of 10, the person caught speeding is the one who called in the complaint to begin with. I have a family friend that works 911 dispatch, and her favorite call was when a guy called in because he got his sack caught in his zipper jeans. He thought he was going to die and kept crying on the line. I live in a neighborhood, I drive a black car, and it looks sporty. So I routinely have mums with strollers trying to tell me to slow down. And I'm always going 15 miles an hour under the speed limit. They got to where they'd be waiting for me to come home to just yell at me. They called the cops. The cops sat in the woods for apparently 2 weeks getting my speeds. I didn't know. I couldn't see them. Well, clocked me under every day going to work and back. They ended up telling the women to leave me alone or they'd arrest them for harassment without me even asking them to do anything. My dad was a dispatcher 30 years ago. "Hi, I'm not sure if this is an emergency, but I think my wife is dead." A friend of mine who's a police dispatcher said a woman called the police because her teenager took the rest of the Doritos from the cupboard and wouldn't put them back. So this semester, in class, a student had lost the lock for his bike, so he brought it into the classroom and set it against the back wall. This was against the rules because in a 200-person lecture hall, 100 bikes would crowd the room. However, this was a spacious classroom with 20 students. The professor said he didn't mind the bike being there as well. Well, the professor next door did mind. He saw this guy bringing his bike inside and told him it was against the rules. The student said, "Okay," and walked past. Next week, the professor sees the bike again and says, "If you bring that bike in here again, I'm calling the police." The student laughs it off and walks past. Next week during class, there was a knock on the classroom door. 4 police officers had shown up. One had her hand covering her face in embarrassment and said, "We received a call that said there was a bike in here which is against the rules, making this trespassing. The bike needs to leave or else we have to arrest you." The student said he doesn't have a lock and it will get stolen. The professor knocks some sense into this kid and tells him to go home because it's not worth getting arrested over one lecture. In the end, no arrests were made. I don't think there was a fine either. Police officers all had a look, saying, "Why are we here?" and they just seemed super embarrassed. The professor who called the cops probably got the bad end of that deal, though. The professor whose class was interrupted had a lot of clout at the university and didn't take kindly to the whole situation. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. There was a lady that called the cops on a homeless shelter because they wouldn't let her turn the dorm into a sauna. She said she was freezing but refused blankets and wanted to use a fire hazard space heater. The cops came, saw the dorm was over 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and told her it wasn't an emergency and left. Had an elderly frequent caller report trespassing. I showed up and didn't see anyone around but her. She said the mosquitoes were landing on the neighbor's dog droppings. She distressingly explained how the mosquitoes would then fly over the fence onto her property. I heard a 911 call where an old woman called the cops because she couldn't open a jar. The woman actually sent the police to help. I went to a house for suspicious footprints in the snow. The footprints led to the oil tank, so I checked the mailbox with the homeowners and found an oil delivery receipt. Wait, you can call the police and they'll show up because of weird footprints? I got the impression that most people at least concealed the real petty reason for their calls until the officer was actually there. Like the lady who called about the trespassing and only later revealed it was mosquitoes intruding on her property. These old person needs something calls we're seeing so much happen more frequently than you'd think. I was an intern with my local police department for about 4 months. Small town of about 10,000 people. Here's a list of the really dumb ones we got. 1. An old woman couldn't back out of her driveway and asked for an officer to help spot her. 2. A woman couldn't find out how to turn off her dryer and was worried about flooding. 3. An old man's alarm clock went off and he couldn't figure out how to turn it off, and he was physically unable to bend down to unplug it. 4. A 17-year-old girl asked if there was traffic in town. That one really made me mad. And 5. An old woman literally just asked for an officer to come over. Turns out she just wanted someone to talk to. And you know what? For each of these calls, an officer was sent over to assist. A lot of people don't like cops, and sometimes it's deserved. But for the most part, cops are just normal citizens who want to help people. The first time my parents left me home alone at age 7, I called the cops because there was a man with a wrench in our fenced-in backyard. I got really scared and thought he was going to break in and hurt me. Turns out he was just fixing the pool heater. My parents weren't expecting him since he was returning to finish a job he started yesterday, which my parents thought he'd finished. The guy decided hiking the fence was easier than coming to the door and asking to be let in, plus he assumed no adults were home since no cars were there. He was in plain clothes. The cops were very nice about it and didn't yell at me, even though I dragged them out for no reason. My parents, on the other hand, will never let me live down the killer poolman of doom incident. This may be apropos of nothing, but I called the police once because there was a guy wandering the mall parking lot across the street from my houses, screaming the F word as loudly as possible, and seemed to be trying to force his way into the mall. I didn't call 911, just police HQ because it wasn't an emergency. 9 cruisers showed up within 5 minutes. Must have been a slow night. I once called the police because there were hundreds of thousands of maggots covering a huge parking lot, and I was convinced there was a body in the nearby dumpster causing the infestation. I might have been drinking a bunch. I'm an EMT and was just listening to the police channel on the radio one night. We hear, "County to district cars, we just had a female caller state there's a black male wearing a hoodie walking down her street." The unit on the road? Okay, what does she want us to do? Dispatch said, no idea. My partner and I laughed for a good half hour over that one. My neighbors have reported the following issues to the police. Lawn clippings on their sidewalk. Apparently my dad, who was in the hospital at the time, blew the clippings onto their side. Not having a fence around an above-ground pool and being worried that their 18-year-old kid is going to drown. The yard has a fence around it, but the pool doesn't have any barriers. It complies with local bylaws, though. Also, our dog barking overnight. We don't have a fricking dog, but they do. Our car being parked in our driveway, and they didn't have enough room to erect a non-compliant fence. Their fence partially falling over because it was installed incorrectly. Having a fire in a legal fire pit, and being worried it was going to burn their house down, which is more than 40 feet away. And having our camper parked in the driveway and not being able to see out their window. The only thing they can see out of that window is the outside wall of our house and one tree. I have dumb fricking neighbors. This isn't even the total list, just what I can remember off the top of my head. My dad in the early 80s was medicated as all hell and called the cops to report that his neighbor stole his green herb. LEO dispatcher here. A lady called into 911 to report her baby back ribs stole right off their grill, while another called in to report that a plane was flying low. Do I look like the Federal Air Association or Shane's Ribs? We dispatched and aired lookouts on both. Deputies called into the radio practically crying at 3 a.m. They were laughing so hard when I confirmed the unit for larceny, she wants her baby back ribs over our radio. Worked for the local newspaper, and we got to read all of the calls to the cops. The most hilarious one was a woman who called in to report a man driving around in his van, playing loud music and luring kids. When the cops showed up, it was the fudging ice cream man. I wish I was making this up. Some people are just nosy busybodies. Well, to be fair, that's an excellent cover for someone engaging in that particular crime. I think out of all the stupid crap we've been reading, that it at least bears checking out if people use the words luring kids. I got pulled over a year ago for speeding, 10 miles per hour over the legal speed limit, and not 1 or 2 or 3, but 4 cop cars showed up to the, quote, scene. It was in my super suburban hometown, and I'm a 5'1" female, driving a non-tinted window smaller SUV. I think I can speak for 3 of the cops who were called that it was pretty fricking dumb. Once a lady called us claiming that her neighbor was threatening her. As it turned out, she claimed that her neighbor was plotting an attack against America. How did she figure this out? She had been going up onto his property and looking into her Middle Eastern neighbor's windows and noticed that he had a prayer rug in the middle of the room and said that he worked odd hours. She was given a stern warning about trespassing onto her neighbor's property and told to stop being such a racist idiot. I liked a Facebook page where all calls to police for incidences are posted for the county. The center of my hometown is the crossroads of 2 major state highways, and they've slowly been expanding them. Traffic is super congested in town, and I repeatedly see posts like, officer called to intersection of 34 and 47 because light is taking too long to change, or officers called to intersection of 34 and 47 because lights have changed but cars remain stopped. Really, people? This construction has been going on for years, but you're still confused? Saw a woman threatening to call the police on the staff of a kebab place in my city because other people, who had ordered before her, were served before her. She then started screaming about how her husband was a lawyer, blah blah, she'll sue, discrimination. She was escorted out by the off-duty cops who were in the place and was seen making a pathetic groveling apology. Spoiled rich witches, male and female. Waste of life and a waste of a good kebab. By the way, on the discrimination thing, this lady was white, drunk, and an idiot. About 12 years ago, I was driving home from a friend's house and I saw an injured raccoon in the middle of the road. It had likely been hit by a car and was unable to move, but it was intact and stood a chance of survival if cared for properly. In a benevolent gesture that was out of character for myself at the time, I called 411 to find out the number for animal control and was told that after midnight, the police took over for animal control. So I called the police and told them there was a hurt raccoon that needed medical attention. In a voice dripping with sarcasm, the dispatcher told me, "Okay, I'll send out an officer to look at the hurt raccoon." I got the message and took it on myself to wrap the raccoon in a shirt and move it onto the grass. It didn't struggle or try to bite. It understood I was trying to help it. In all likelihood, it died on the lawn later that evening, but at least it didn't get run over. That night I had a dream where a human-sized raccoon fed me amber liquid. I don't recall having ever tasted scotch before, but I instinctively recognized that was what it was that I was drinking. The next day I bought a bottle of scotch and it was the same flavor from my dream. The bottle was empty by the end of the weekend and I wasn't sober again for years. I was living under a bridge by the end of it. It took me everything to overcome the crushing grip of alcoholism, but I finally got my crap together. This April makes 7 years I've been sober. A woman called 911 at 5 a.m. to report her son wouldn't get up to wash the dishes. She went to jail. Misuse of 911 is a crime in my jurisdiction. One's child not doing the dishes is not a valid use of 911 services. Backstory: we live in a 3-family home, and our landlord had agreed to rent the upstairs apartment to a couple moving from out of state without meeting them. After getting a good reference about them from the man who was hiring one of them to work for him, they were white trash. Loud at all hours, severely underweight, with a filthy dog, smoked in the house, they were told not to do this, and even jimmied the washing machine open to steal quarters. The landlord didn't collect these, the washing machine was just on our neighbor's grid, and they were used to reimburse them for the utilities that we used. We shared a common entryway with these garbage people, and my boyfriend left his jacket out there. In the morning, the last few cigarettes from his pack and $2 were missing. He called the landlord to let them know. At this point, our landlord was desperate to get them out and was trying to build a case. So our landlord called the police. An officer had to come over and take a report. We felt kind of silly. In short, our landlord called the cops over $2 and a few cigarettes. What was the grossest or most ridiculous thing that happened to you at a restaurant? They said no when I asked for a glass of water, please. I went to a restaurant on my birthday. They found out and surprised me with a huge piece of cake. Then they added the cake to the receipt. Happy birthday! Here's your not free cake. As a server, I've done this once or twice, but luckily I caught it before. I have to ring it in for inventory reasons. You can't split it off the check on most serving OSs and comp it off for later. Just don't always mistake ignorance as malice, guys. I was a few bites into eating my salad, and there was one particularly interesting shiny piece of lettuce. I stabbed into it with my fork and pulled it out. This was no piece of lettuce. This was a wing and body of a huge dead grasshopper in the middle of my salad. I flung my fork across the room in a panic. I will never return. Went to a local Mexican restaurant, ordered our food, sat there for damn near 2 hours and it never came. I asked the waitress twice where our food was, and she apologized and said it was coming. It never came, so we got up and went to leave. 3 employees came up to us and said they were going to call the cops on us for dine and dashing. I told those dumb F-heads we never even got our food and walked past them. Haven't been back since, and it's been roughly 8 or 9 years. I told the guy, no shrimp. We started eating and I turned into an itchy, flaming hot Cheeto. The waiter tells me the cook doesn't do alterations. You could have said something to me before, idiot. The nozzle fell off the soda fountain and bug parts fell out into my cup. Roaches and other bugs in the soda fountain are actually a common problem if you don't clean it properly. So I told a worker and they just screwed the nozzle back on when they thought I wasn't looking. Who knows what else they weren't cleaning? Yeah, look behind you, customer. Yes, that's right. I cleaned all of the bugs out of the machine and got it working again in the half second where I had you looking at that street lamp. No further questions? Good. Who else wants soda? Was eating at a Chinese restaurant where you order rice by the bowl. From the angle I was sitting, I saw the waiters take half uneaten bowls of rice and dumping them back into the rice cooker. My uncle has a story like this. High school job, he was working as a busboy in a local Chinese restaurant. They stiff him on the tips one week and he says that if he doesn't get his fair share, he'll tell everyone about the rice. What's with the rice, you might ask? Well, he was instructed when bussing to take rice on the table, wipe it into the bowl of rice and bring it back into the kitchen for reuse. Table rice being reused. The infamous line is the manager saying to him, "You shut up now," giving him his tip money and him never going back. Had the police called on us for not paying for a meal we never received. A group of us had stopped in a local diner that we'd been to a number of times. Good food, adequate prices, that kind of thing. Took a bit to get a table, but not all that bad. Took 15 minutes to get a waitress to take our drink and food order, and another 25 minutes to get our drinks. After another 40 minutes with no food, they weren't that busy. We said screw it, left more than enough to cover the drinks, told the manager that we weren't going to wait any longer, and left. Fast forward to about 1 a.m. My friends get a knock on their door, and it turns out it's the local police for the city the restaurant was in. They'd been given a report of a dine and dash from the manager, apparently getting my friend's plate number. The manager's contention was that because we'd ordered, and they were in the process of cooking the food, that we were required to pay for it. After explaining the situation, the police decided to side with us, but decided that we should not return to the restaurant, and we took them up on the suggestion. We found out several months later that the diner had shifted to a pay-at-order method, even though they weren't a fast food place. They ended up closing shortly thereafter. There was a small fly, a fruit fly I think, in my fried egg. It was all fried and crispy. I wasn't even that bothered. I'm not a confrontational person, and I didn't even want a whole new meal. I just wanted a new egg. The waitress came back from the kitchen and said the chef was insisting it was a bit of herb that he uses in his cooking. You could see the legs and wings. They were so insistent that I could see it wasn't worth arguing. They were a new business as well, so you would have thought they'd want to establish a customer base. The Gaslight Bar and Grill. My wife had an allergic reaction, clearly mentioning she was allergic to eggs, and they said that a creamy substance on the side was cream cheese, but it was mayo. 15 minutes later, she was intubated in the emergency room. Nope, never going there again. Anyway, the restaurant closed last year. The little brownie mix package was baked into the goddamn brownie. Oh, that? It's just a little extra flavoring. Really helps improve the texture. All of our customers love it. They lost a lawsuit over stealing a server's tips. Best pancakes, stuffed French toast, and breakfast skillets of my life, but I couldn't do it after that. We went to the Old Country buffet a long time ago, and my dad got a hot dog that turned out to be moldy. We haven't gone back. I worked at this place for one day. It was a deli-type place. I had 5 years kitchen experience and needed the work in my small town. Within 5 minutes, I was questioning their sanitary disposition with unregulated temperatures, improper disposal methods, and general disregard for cleanliness. After a half hour, I told myself I needed the money, I could look past it, and do my best to make improvements over time. Then came the French fry that broke the camel's back. Their fryer, they dumped a basket of fries in it, but when it came out, it had a brown film or sludge over the delicious, crispy fried potato product. I asked if they were going to serve that to the customer. They said, yes, it's the gravy. After further questioning, I found out they inherited the property and the oil hasn't been changed in 7 years. After 45 minutes of working there, I quit and called the health inspector, and I never looked back. Butter chicken had no chicken. I called the manager, and the guy seemed like this was a regular thing. I told them we're not paying, and they didn't give a frick and said, okay. I used to go to a local Mexican restaurant so much that I knew the workers by name, and they knew me by name. I went with my friend, and she was being super flirty and made a deal with the waiter that she'd go on a date for a free drink. When we left, she said she wasn't going on that date. I can never return to that restaurant. Local breakfast place in my hometown that I went to as a kid. Ordered a Belgian waffle and it comes out dark brown and crunchy. I complained that it was burnt and they sent it back to make a new one. About 5 minutes later, they returned with a new waffle. Except it wasn't new, it had bite marks, right where I'd bitten it. And hey, the section I bit out had butter on it. They'd walked in the back, turned the waffle over, and thought no one would notice. When this took place, I was about 7. I refused to go back to the restaurant for well over a decade, but they remained open. It's a small town and a local business, so maybe that's not surprising. About a year ago, I went back in and was pleasantly surprised by my experience. My waitress was also the new manager, and she was sweet as could be. Had no issues with the service, and when my food came out, it was delicious. I still only ordered the pancakes, though. Yeah, I mean, if the restaurant lasts that long, it's a fair assumption that the same people who had committed the offense had probably moved on, and that it wasn't so consistently awful that all its customers had abandoned it. Good save, breakfast place. Super hipster pancake place in Portland. Long waits for brunch, was dragged there on a date. 2-hour wait for frickin' pancakes, and when we finally got in, after getting a single mimosa, the power goes down. Their response? Make everyone pay for what they'd ordered, not even received, and give jump-the-line tickets to people still in line, but nothing but a hearty frick you to the diners. Never again. During college, I caught the Chinese food restaurant's employees sneezing in the food. They saw me see it from far away and walked into the back. I told everyone that I knew. Went to a local Mexican place and got a burrito. I took a bite in and found glass. Gracias. Found a bunch of eaten chicken wing bones in my appetizer basket. They just dropped a new piece of paper over them and filled it up with onion rings. I pointed it out to the manager, then declined to get my appetizer for free and walked out. They bring out food quickly after I order it. It's lukewarm. I send it back, I hear the microwave ding, they bring it out, still cold in the center. They put their finger in the center to verify, then they take it out back again. Ding! May I have a to-go box? It was a restaurant in Waikiki the last night of our vacation. The place was crawling with bedbugs. We didn't know they were bedbugs at the time and didn't actually figure out until we were back home and the telltale bites developed. We had to call our hotel and tell them we may have introduced bedbugs to the room. They freaked out, but hey, it was their employee who recommended the place. We had to empty out the freezer to deep freeze everything we couldn't boil or leave roasting in a black garbage bag on a sunny patio for weeks. We had to put special covers on our mattresses and vacuum and scrub every surface every day. Our house wasn't infested, but it was over a month before we could relax. When I called the restaurant, the manager said, "Oh yeah, we have a terrible bedbug infestation. We have an exterminator come once a month, but every place in Waikiki has bedbugs. Everyone knows that. You should read the local newspaper." When we wrote about it on TripAdvisor, the same manager called us to ask us to remove the review. In return, we'd get dinner on the house if we ever returned. Not only am I never going back to that restaurant, I'm not even going back to Oahu. Frick you, Lulus. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Kenosha Steakhouse, Breckenridge, Colorado. I was living and working over at Keystone for my first of 4+ years in Summit County. I had some friends visiting me from out of state. We went into Breckenridge for a night of shenanigans. We went to the saloon and bar place on Main Street in Breck called Kenosha Steakhouse. Waitress didn't show up for 15 minutes. Then it took another 25 minutes for the 3 beers we'd ordered to come in. We'd ordered food at the same time, and those came out 20 minutes after the beers, so 45 minutes after ordering. From sitting down to having food on our table, it was 1 hour. The food was bland and barely warm. The waitress never showed up again to offer us a refill. We had to flag another server to get our check. They then refused to split a 3-top check, despite never stating as much before or showing that anywhere. On the way out, I went to complain to a manager, and some staff member faked being management, and another staffer told us it won't make any difference to me when I pointed out that I worked in hospitality in county and this experience was beyond unacceptable. The snide comment from the waiter about it not making any difference struck a deep nerve. I checked in thousands of guests from that point until I stopped working in hospitality. Every one of those guests I explicitly told not to go to that restaurant. On top of that, I moved to Breck and lived there for 2 years. I'd approach people on the street looking at the outdoor menu outside of Kenosha and dissuade them away. I also was working in a sales position intermittently during this time, and I told the same story to all guests I interacted with. But I didn't make any difference, right? Mexican restaurant I'd never been to before. Me and 2 friends go in, wait for a while by the door while being stared at by the staff, and eventually we seat ourselves. A boy no older than 10 years old greets us after a minute, and I asked for a water. He said they didn't have water. They didn't have water. They didn't have water? They didn't have water? A cockroach ran out of the basket of tortilla chips, and the waitress's response was, "Oh, that happens sometimes." A family-owned restaurant didn't honor a 3-week-in-advance reservation for Valentine's Day, but instead overbooked and didn't seat us until an hour later. Then proceeded to give us silverware and ask us for drinks 20 minutes after that. We just said not to bother and left. We were completely ignored. It was a small, family-owned Mexican restaurant that was extremely popular. We'd been there many times, we were the only people sitting in one waitress's section. We watched her as she stood there talking to the busboys and cooks, in plain view of our table. We had to walk up to her to ask her to take our order and go up again to ask for another margarita. We then had to go up and ask for the check. It was the only time I didn't leave a tip somewhere. I have no idea what we did to her. The other waitress in a different section was actually doing her job and she had a full section. The only thing I can think of is it was the end of her shift and she didn't care. I still remember clearly when I went to a restaurant called Bamboo House. I was just enjoying my pho when I felt something hard on my tongue. I pulled it out of my mouth and it was a bitten off toenail. Never effed with that place again. They literally asked if I wanted another bowl. Which? You think I want another bowl after that? But this one might not have any toenail in it. Cripes, that is seriously gross. In what universe doesn't the manager just go in and scream at the chef when that happens? Actually, no, I get it. Chefs are scary. Welcome, one and all, to my Valentine's nightmare. My fiancé and I went to a popular local-owned seafood restaurant. Because we knew it would get packed, we arrived pretty early. I ordered a rum and coke, and my significant other ordered a Sprite because he was driving. The waitress brought me a rum and coke, but brought him a 7 and 7. We explained the mistake to the waitress, and I told her not to worry about it, and I'd drink the 7 and 7 and to please bring a Sprite. When she brought our meals, she brought me the wrong meal. She apologized and I assumed went to reorder my meal. I ordered crab legs. 20 minutes go by and my fiancé is finished eating and we're just waiting. The waitress never returned to our table. She didn't come by to refill his Sprite or tell me my food was on its way. Nothing. I finally decided this is just crazy and I flagged her down and asked her to please cancel my order and get us our check. I explained that we'd pay for all the drinks and the food that my fiancé ate, but I wasn't paying for the food that I ordered and never received. About 5 minutes later, she comes back to our table crying her eyes out. I mean, really sobbing. Her manager told us that she had to pay for our meal. My fiancé told her, "No, we'll pay for what we ate and drank. Please go get your manager." The manager came to our table with my food. At this point, I'm not eating. I just want to get out of there. I decline the food and ask for our bill. The manager storms off with the plate of food. He comes back. We're on the second floor of the restaurant, and he just stands on the other side of the room. The waitress is waiting on customers but still sniffling. My fiancé walks up to the manager and asks again for our bill. Tells him that we don't want the waitress to pay for our food and drinks and that we don't have any problem paying for what we had. The manager then starts loudly yelling at him. Mind you, this is in an area with many other diners. He's telling him that we planned this and that we did this on purpose to get a free meal out of them. My significant other is a big dude and doesn't take crap from anyone, but I was proud of him. He just turned around and we left. I'm sure that poor waitress ended up paying for our food and drinks, but they wouldn't give us the bill. I ended up eating peanut butter and jelly for dinner that night. I've had many things go wrong in restaurants, but none of them have stopped me from going to a place again. I have very low standards. I was at a macaroni grill. I felt something on my leg, then swatted at my jeans. Went to the bathroom and found nothing, but returned and saw there was a crushed roach under the table. Basically, I crushed it against my jeans and it had fallen off out of the jeans afterwards. I told the waitress who just offered a free dessert. Really wasn't angry, and we just joked about it, but afterwards, I did avoid that location. It was our favorite bar. We used to live down the road from it. We had our first date there and knew every employee, even the cooks in the back. We moved about 25 minutes away. We got engaged and needed to save money. We went for the first time in months. The menu had changed drastically. The management changed. Almost none of the servers recognized us. Most of the staff had left. We tried to give it a go, but the food was awful. They'd even changed cooks. We realized what we had was gone. Steak and Shake south of Houston. Went in and the staff didn't really seem to give a crap, but whatever. Ordered a Royale and it was delicious. Until I noticed the mold on the bottom of the bun. Not just a little either. I'm talking multicolored, nasty, moldy bun. On a burger that I'd already eaten like a third of. I showed it to the waiter who seemed pretty blazed and he just said, "Oh, I'm sorry man. Do you want something else?" I asked for the manager who didn't charge us and gave us a coupon for a free meal that we'd never used. I was blowing chunks in the parking lot before we left. I booked a table for 7 at an Indian restaurant. I had this confirmed by email, and the manager even called me a few hours before to remind me and let me know that they were looking forward to hosting us. I arrived at the restaurant and the manager was nowhere to be seen. The staff tell me there's no booking and even suggest I've booked over the road. I show them my phone log and they say it's definitely not their phone number. They begin trying to usher us towards the exit. I start thinking I've messed up big time and freak out. I've screwed up organizing a get-together for my best friend who's moving away. I decide to call the number that had phoned me earlier. Then the restaurant telephone right next to us starts to ring. The guy who said I had no booking picks up. He notices it's me but decides to pretend he thinks I'm another customer calling in. It feels like a scene from Fawlty Towers. I'm on the phone to him and standing right next to him. "Hello, I'm standing right beside you. I have a booking. I've got an email confirmation and you also called me today. You just pretended this wasn't your number and now you've answered it right in front of me. I'm pretty sure I'm not booked over the road, but I kind of wish that I was now." There was hair baked into my quesadilla. Not a hair, an amount of hair. Like, enough that I was concerned for the health of the chef. My wife is celiac, so a really intense, real gluten allergy. We had a gluten-free menu. It lists chicken and waffles. She orders it, takes a few bites, comments that it's the best gluten-free waffle she's ever tasted, then starts to feel sick, asks the waiter, "Oh, the waffle isn't gluten-free, just the chicken." When I was 3, my parents and I were at Pizza Hut, and when the waiter brought out drinks, he spilled them all over me. All 3 of us had gotten soda, so I was sticky. This in itself wasn't too bad, but when my parents got the check, we realized that they'd charged us for 2 sets of drinks, one of which was the ones that were spilled on me. When my dad asked the waiter about this, he said it was only fair. This is the only time I've heard about my dad not tipping. Skeptics. What insane conspiracies do you actually believe in? That anti-dandruff shampoos temporarily get rid of dandruff, but somehow dry your scalp out even more over time, so that it worsens your dandruff when you stop using it. So I thought that I had dandruff for years and always used Head & Shoulders or other related dandruff shampoos, and nothing really worked. One day my friend says, "Are you sure you have dandruff and not just dry scalp?" I thought they were the same thing, so I did some Googling. Turns out if you have dry scalp, dandruff shampoos make it worse. Just to check, I stopped using dandruff shampoos and started doing things to treat dry scalp, and my, quote, dandruff went away, after like 20 years of me dealing with it. Yep, I could have just gone to a dermatologist, but then I wouldn't have been able to put this comment on the internet. Dandruff and dry scalp sufferers unite. For the few people asking what I did for the dry scalp, the biggest thing I did was brush my hair more often, which loosened up the flakes. After 2 decades of struggling with this is what fixed it, so you can imagine my irritated happiness. Since I do have really thick hair, using a hairdryer helps a lot versus air drying. I still have some problems with weather changes, but it's not an everyday issue like it was. I stay away from all medicated shampoos and tea tree oils now. Now let's find a way to fix my acne. I believe Area 51 was a base for building and testing new top-secret aircraft. When the government denied its obvious existence, it took on a lot of interest from the conspiracy theorist world. The US government now works to maintain the mystery around the base in order to maintain the focus of the conspiracy theorist community and distract them from the actual things going on elsewhere. I don't think many people would contend that Area 51 is just an Air Force base now, and the most secret thing that goes on there is testing prototype aircraft. It almost certainly benefits them that people attribute it to alien research, as it means they aren't looking harder at what they're actively working on, and thus, people can't develop counters to their new tools of warfare. Dr. Kelly, a WMD weapons expert, was murdered by the British government in 2003. I remember this happening. It was weird. The guy was demonized in most of the press for spreading misinformation, and then his self-deletion was all over the papers, and the next day a couple of reports of mysterious men in suits disappearing from the scene, and then those witnesses were hurriedly silenced. A very public inquiry was launched which ruled the death as a self-deletion, at the expense of an inquest. Afterwards, the medical records were sealed at the time, although the results of the inquest were later released in 2010. Medical experts have since requested whether he removed himself, and of course, we now know that he was right to question the 45-minute launch of WMDs in Iraq. I'm convinced in 50 years we'll discover he died for nothing, no one will care, but at the time his death squashed any powerful voices claiming Blair was wrong to push ahead with the Iraq War. I think that aliens know we're here and potentially visit the Earth from time to time. Now, while there's definitely life on other planets, just think statistically about how many other planets there are, it's gotta happen more than once, right? I did used to seriously doubt that aliens ever came here, it just doesn't make much sense. The main problem I saw is that there would be no logical motive for aliens to visit us, but not want any direct contact. That's like going to a party, but sneaking around the outside rather than going in. A while ago, however, someone else on the internet pointed out that there are tribes deep in the Amazon rainforest who've never contacted the outside world. In fact, it's actually illegal to visit them. They're being preserved and observed, but primarily preserved. What that guy on the internet was suggesting was that there may be some kind of advanced alien civilization who knows we're here, but avoiding direct contact in order to preserve us and our way of life. Sure, we're talking pretty unimaginable technologies here, but then, if you brought one of those Amazonian tribesmen out and told him that we can get to the moon and talk with anyone we want in the world, that would just blow his mind. In short, aliens know we're here, but they avoid contact in order to preserve us. That Harvey Milk's death was more than about his being gay. Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone were part of the more left-wing faction in San Francisco politics that wanted, among other things, to figure out a solution for the rent increases that were pricing long-time residents out of the city. Other members of the Board of Supervisors, like Dianne Feinstein, were quite liberal by national standards but were firmly in the pocket of real estate developers. When Dan White quit his post as a member of the board, it meant that they lost one of their most pro-business members, and since Moscone was going to get to appoint White's successor, they'd end up with someone who was really strong on the anti-gentrification side instead. Since the board was already closely split, this would represent a critical realignment in city politics. The real estate developers and the police association had meetings where they tried to offer Dan White various things if he'd try to get his old job back. There were former police officers who were among Dan White's strongest supporters. So he agreed, and Moscone appeared to be considering it initially, but Milk went to Moscone and jammed this idea up. After this, White shot Milk and Moscone. Dianne Feinstein replaced Moscone as mayor and used that position to appoint more moderates to the empty seats on the council. The chief of police, who was well liked by the gay community but roundly hated by his own rank and file, was fired. Dan White was given 7 years in jail for a double murder and served 5, and today a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco rents for $3,500 a month. There isn't enough evidence to really accuse anyone of anything, yet it's breathtaking how all of these big power players seemed to get what they wanted because of the actions of a lone nut. I'm a fan of the lost cosmonaut theory, the idea that the Russians were cutting a lot of corners to be the first in space, so Yuri Gagarin wasn't the first man in space, just the first to make it back alive. That the BBC brought on Chris Evans to host the new Top Gear knowing full well that everyone would hate him. Then, once they replaced him with someone better for the next season, people would compare the new host to Chris Evans and not Jeremy Clarkson, so people would like the new Top Gear more. This is similar to the new Coke conspiracy theory, the theory that Coca-Cola wanted to change from sugar to corn syrup to increase profits, but they knew that there was a slight taste difference that people would notice and reject. To hide this, they introduced an even more different formula, New Coke, and while it entered the market, they were able to flush the original sugar-based Coke from the pipeline. People rejected New Coke as they expected, which gave them the opportunity to, quote, listen to their customers and reintroduce Coke Classic, now made with corn syrup. Customers rejoiced at having their original flavor back, not noticing it was now slightly different than before. Coca-Cola also got a large amount of publicity out of all of this and helped cement affinity for the brand. Regardless of whether this is true, it is the kind of thing a megacorporation would do. However, I feel like there's bottles of old Coke left in the world, and if we wanted to prove it, we probably could have by now. Hot dogs are sold in packs of 12. Hot dog buns are sold in packs of 8. If you want enough hot dogs to go with buns, and vice versa, you have to buy 2 packs of hot dogs and 3 packs of buns. Otherwise, you're left with some useless leftovers. I'm on to you, hot dog mafia. And yeah, sure, different regions, brands, and different countries package them in different quantities. In various places you might find them in packages of 5, 6, 8, 10 or 12, or any or all of those, doesn't mean the entire world gets them packaged the same way. That Smash Bros. Conspiracy where they already have the characters they want for the new game picked out, but they let us vote to make us think we have some power. Women's pants don't have usable pockets, so they have to buy purses. I have a few female friends that buy men's skinny jeans just to have the pockets. That for the conspiracy theories proven to be true, MK Ultra comes to mind, we've likely only seen the tip of the iceberg. It's very possible that we shot down Flight 93. I was in the Air Force from 08 to 14 as a crew chef. During, I met multiple people that were stationed at Langley AFB in Washington, D.C. that said we definitely scrambled F-16s that day from the base, and some of them came back with less armament than they took off with. It's horrible to think that we'd do this, but it does make sense. 2 planes have hit the towers, 1 on the Pentagon, and now that you get a plane that's not responding to any callbacks, what do you do? Again, it's horrible, but in my opinion, that plane has got to come down. If all this is true though, the skeptic in me is surprised at the length at which the government has gone with the stories of cell phone calls, heroics, the movie, and other things. And yeah, I understand Langley is not geographically located in DC, but given its vicinity and importance, the district is commonly used as its reference point. Langley is commonly referred to as the tip of the sphere, and most of the Air Force's central intelligence is based there. As I said, I am, for the most part, a skeptic of the possibility of this. This is what I believe the question called for, and I'm just saying that out of all of the conspiracies out there, this is one I'm not as quick to dismiss, due to personal references that I've encountered. While I do currently own tinfoil in my household, none of it is in any form of headgear. And I'd like to confirm I've had no run-ins with any secret government agencies as of yet. I'll keep you posted, my current level of concern may rise given how this Trump thing plays out. Lip balm temporarily makes your lips feel moisturized and soft, but dries out your lips over time, so you end up buying more. Keep hydrated, everyone. It's a great way to prevent chapped lips. 2 liters a day is the recommended amount, but varies based on age, weight, activity levels, and other things. That Michael Jordan was suspended by the NBA for gambling, and they covered it up as his baseball era. The NBA had too much to lose from tarnishing Jordan's name. The RNG in XCOM is rigged. I know they're rookies, but what the frick was the chance of missing 4 60% shots in a row? I bet my left testy that any shot where the chance is displayed as 85% may as well be 10%. I don't care what you say, you can't convince me otherwise. And don't get me started on the dodge bull crap, like the game needed more ways to make me want to punch a puppy. Guys, I don't want to sound like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat or anything, but I think O.J. Simpson killed those people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to think that all prisons were filled with sociopaths and murderers, until I started interning at one and seeing it from the inside. There's definitely something shady going on with corporations and the free labor. I'm totally convinced our criminal justice system was designed to keep slavery around. Call me paranoid, but I'm a subscriber to the idea that we're being spied on. At any moment, the NSA can tap into my camera and microphone on my phone and observe me. Not that they'd want to observe me, but I think they can do it to anyone. I don't know if this is as much a conspiracy theory as much as an unspoken fact of life these days. I mean, we know that we're being spied on all the time, and our data is being used to inform corporations, as seen in our targeted ads and such on social media. If you do want to go further than that, though, most of the people the narrator knows who work in IT do put tape over their webcams, and they are much more informed about this sort of thing than we are. Honestly, I'm normally not one for these, but I can't help but believe, when faced with the overwhelming evidence, that King of the Hill was cancelled due to Dale's theories being uncomfortably close to the truth. I don't necessarily trust our 2 cats. When I walk into the room, they look at me, separate, and go their own ways. Technology breaking just after its warranty expires isn't a conspiracy. We're told to design it that way. You put heat-generating components near heat-sensitive components so they degrade and break. The trick is to design them close enough to break, but far away enough to not break too soon. This is something that I've immersed myself in over the past 5 years of my life. I consider myself a skeptic, and consider the average conspiracy theorist to be the foremost discreditor of legitimate conspiracy theories. I've come to realize that at the source of so many wild conspiracy theories, there lies a grain of truth, which was drowned out by rampant speculation and paranoia. You have to understand that wherever conspiracy theories are discussed, the mentally ill and the paranoid will flock there like moths to a flame. They drown out any rational discussion, and some of these things you can't mention without triggering that automatic reaction of, "Oh, you're one of those people." At that point, people stop listening to you with an open mind. Any conspiracy theorist worth his salt knows to avoid certain trigger words. If you want some real conspiracies, they're surprisingly out in the open. The MK Ultra sub-projects sound like a paranoid fantasy, but I'd be happy to share thousands of FOIA documents on the subject. Massive, elite rings of people doing illicit activities, often involving inappropriate behavior with minors, that are a reality as well. Just look at the recent investigations in the UK surrounding the Westminster Ring or the Detroit affair in Belgium. Hell, look at Jeffrey E.'s Island, which was set up for blackmail based on the bedroom activities of elites. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, search for a US Customs report on a cult called The Finders, and the subsequent news reports. I find that it's sometimes better to simply give someone a lead and let them come to their own conclusions. Have you ever heard of Adnan Khashoggi? Once you start searching names like his, it's hard to deny that there's a class of protected criminals operating on a supranational level. The conclusion I've come to is that real conspiracies are incredibly convoluted and, above all, boring. To have a good foundation, you have to investigate a few major scandals and how they overlap. Iran-Contra, Bank of Credit and Commerce International, and the savings and loan scandal. I could include a few others as well, but investigating those scandals will familiarize you with the major players. Once you do that, then you start seeing these obscure criminals and power players in other places that you wouldn't expect to. That's when crap starts to get weird and most people become confused, overwhelmed, and paranoid. Then they become the very people who can only ramble on and on incoherently, unable to explain what they know, and ironically discrediting the very conspiracies that they sought to expose. What happens after a certain point is that the plethora of front companies and power players gets jumbled up in your mind. You can't adequately articulate it or envision the exact structure, so unless you're willing to actually map those things out with a character web, then you just wind up passing on little tidbits of information without context. So as information passes from researcher to researcher, it gets more confusing, and there are less references and evidence offered. This leads newcomers to believe that there isn't actually any proof, but in reality it's just because it's one of the most difficult topics to articulate, especially the deeper you go. Some people do actually map out the connections, and the one guy who came closest to naming the usual suspects was an artist named Mark Lombardi. I highly recommend checking out his Wikipedia page. He wound up self-deleting, after painstakingly mapping out connections that would become relevant in later scandals. And it's no wonder, because this stuff takes a psychological toll. After a certain point, most researchers simply decide, I can't do this anymore. I know something evil is going on, but for my mental health, I need to step back. I'll tell you one thing, it's an alienating and surreal feeling to be armed with this knowledge. I remember back when the Panama Papers story broke and we learned that Mossack was the son of a former Third Reich official who wound up working for the CIA in Cuba. I thought to myself, yeah, this fits the bill. I bet Adnan Khashoggi and Farhad Azima will turn up in there somewhere. And sure enough, subsequent news reports showed that Khashoggi and Azima were implicated. Now, how is it that I, a humble Google armchair warrior, can see all of this going on, but it still remains beneath the surface? Conspiracies suppress themselves at this point. It's much easier to laugh at them than sift through all of the paranoia and convoluted nonsense. Much easier not to put yourself through the living hell that Mark Lombardi did. Much easier to take the safer road and not be perceived as one of those people. Why do I have to anonymously write into a YouTube channel to even mention these things that are easily verifiable with mainstream media reports? I have to lead a virtual double life because my friends and family would view me differently if they knew the things that I believed. It doesn't matter that I could prove it to them with sources that they deemed credible. They just wouldn't give me the time and willingness. In short, many horrific conspiracies are real, but they automatically suppress themselves. No shills required. I wonder if just narrating these is going to set off a chain of events that turns the narrator into the kind of person who researches these things exhaustively in his own time. I'm not saying that I'm convinced one way or the other, just that when people swear the evidence is there, it's almost a challenge for me to look them up myself. If it makes a difference to you, dear viewers, the narrator would like to present the material here just as an overview of these theories, rather than come off as a proponent of any of them. There is absolutely no reason for contact cases to be as large as they are, except to increase the amount of saline solution needed to cover up your contact lenses. Big saline companies are out to get us. Far more advanced technology is available, but for the sake of certain companies' profits, we don't get certain technologies. For example, we had a prototype electric car capable of a 250-mile range back in 1914. You're telling me 66 years later and it's not a normal part of society? The dependency on oil is stifling our advancements as a society. Greed is holding us back. Beyoncé was never really pregnant with Blue Ivy in 2011. Beyoncé is highly controlling of her public image and is more than capable of pulling this off. Beyoncé's pregnant belly inflated and deflated throughout her pregnancy. In one interview, her pregnant belly appears to collapse. In interviews, she'd mess up and say inconsistent due dates, not messing up by a few days but by months. Despite being one of the most talked about celebrity pregnancies, there's no leaked information about the birth. During the birth, we know Beyoncé and Jay-Z sectioned off an entire wing of Lenox Hill Hospital. I can see wanting some privacy, but what were they hiding that they had to shut off a whole wing? The theory is that Beyoncé's career is highly dependent on her body and keeping it tight. Or they might have fertility issues. J paid a surrogate to carry their baby, then shut down a whole wing of the hospital so no one would know Beyoncé never gave birth and wouldn't see the surrogate. No photos were released of Bey shortly after the pregnancy because people would have been able to tell she hadn't just been pregnant. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was a key part of Clinton's 2008 campaign. Tim Kaine was the chairman of the DNC before Schultz. Clinton offered Kaine the position of vice president if he stepped down and recommended Schultz as his replacement. He stepped down. Schultz became the chairman of the DNC after a short period. She proceeded to do everything in her power to rig the elections so that Clinton got the nomination. Clinton's VP nominee is Tim Kaine. Soccer will never be popular in America because the broadcasters have no desire to create demand for it. It's essentially 45 minutes of commercial-free programming. Who wants that? Success of football and baseball is directly linked to their built-in ability to have breaks for commercials. Air those games all the time. The advertisers have chosen America's interest, and it's impossible to change without broadcast support. Similar to why no one wants to promote hockey in America, because it doesn't really lend itself to broadcast advertising. I believe the government created Throwback Thursday so they could get all of our old pictures on their databases. Mainstream media only reports things for ratings, while they pass up on actual world news that could affect us, and they intentionally misinform people to make the situation and public outcry worse. This is kind of answering the opposite question, but I feel the need to share. There are people who are proponents of the September 11th buildings being brought down by controlled demolition, saying that the videos look the same as one. I think they're looking at it the wrong way. Why does controlled demolition look the way it does? Because engineers plan explosives to take advantage of the building's natural weak points. If a large building was to actually fall on its own, it would look the same because they both fail at the same weak points. There are so many conspiracies about that, but I've never seen one actually address that issue. It's not that the buildings look like controlled demolition, but that controlled demolition looks like an actual building collapse. We just haven't had any other skyscrapers fall naturally to compare. What did you say to an annoying customer to shut them the hell up? One of my favorite stories from my brief time in customer service was when a man who called up the night after a major hurricane was screaming that his service didn't work, that he'd complained multiple times and this was the last straw. Clearly, our service sucked, and it was our fault his cable was out. He kept cutting me off and calling me rude names when I finally just interjected, "Sir, your cable isn't out because of an issue with your service. Your cable is out because a tree branch fell across the cable line." "What's that? How do I know?" "Because you live at number 78 and I live at number 75. I saw the branch fall. I'm the one who went out in the rain last night to get the branch out of the street. In fact, I know you know it's a branch because I could see you looking out your window at me moving the branch that fell on your property. Not only that, but when I was done, I went inside and called into work on my day off to arrange a bucket truck to come out and rerun the cable so you could beat the rush of calls that came in all across the island due to the storm. You didn't even have to call, a truck is already en route. And, well, that shut him up. I worked at a photo printing lab and we got people in all the time who claimed we were stupid and had messed up their pictures. One woman had us print 800 vacation pictures. They were bad quality, dark, and out of focus. When she came to pick them up, she insisted that we'd ruined them and that they were perfect in her camera and that she had a very expensive camera, so there was no way the pictures could be dark or out of focus. We finally gave her money back even though we'd done nothing wrong and we were out a lot of time and paper. She called us 30 minutes later and told us she was at a store across town, and they'd reprinted all of her pictures and they were beautiful, in focus, and nice and bright. I had to tell her that the same person who owned our store also owned the store across town, and that not only would it have taken the store several hours to reprint 800 pictures, but their printer was down that day, so they couldn't have printed anything. She hung up on me. This is a woman with too much time on her hands. If you believe the store messed up your photos, fine, delude yourself. But why do you have to flat out invent fairy tales to try and get the last word in? Get a life. My roommates and I decided to grab some Subway before we went out one Friday night. One of them is half Ecuadorian, and the Subway employees were both Hispanic. While I was in the process of ordering my sandwich, the two workers were speaking to each other in Spanish. When it was my friend's turn, he ordered in Spanish as well, which I thought was simply a gesture. I couldn't figure out why both employees looked like ghosts and stammered their way through the entire ordering process. When I got back in the car, my friend said that the two workers had been like, "Look at this pretty boy, pretending to be cultured. What a queer, he doesn't even know the language." At which point my friend decided to place his entire order in Spanish and thank them at the end of the transaction. A customer wanted to return a computer that was about a year old when I worked in retail. I asked him what was wrong. "It just don't work." I powered it on, got into Windows, connected to the wireless network, and went online. I opened Office and everything seems to be working properly. I show it to him and ask what's wrong. "It just don't work." I asked him what was actually wrong with the machine, let alone why would you return a computer a year later. "It just don't work. Are you saying that if a car don't start, it works fine?" At this point, I'd had enough of the guy. "No, sir. I'm saying that if there was a car and everyone could start it except one person, I wouldn't blame the car." Customer smoking in a supermarket, year 2000. Staff member asks customer to stop smoking. Customer refuses. Customer escalates to me, a customer service manager at the time. I grabbed a large fire extinguisher, CO2, walk up to the customer and said, "If you don't put the cigarette out now, I'll be forced to assume you're on fire and act accordingly." The customer dropped the cigarette, stamped it out with her foot, and left the store. I was working at a gas station in a very rich part of town. During a nice summer day, a prime example of the D-bag variety of the human species drove his super expensive Lamborghini in, and in that haughty, "I'm rich so you must do what I say" voice, demanded that it be filled with premium, which the attendant started to do, only the guy immediately snatched the nozzle from him and screamed that, "You're too stupid to do this on your own." We're in Oregon, by the way, where you can't pump your own gas. It's a state fire law. Well, being that he's a D-bag and an idiot, gas spills out from the nozzle all over his sparkly D-bag mobile. At this point, he truly flips out and storms into the store where I'm working as the cashier and de facto manager. He immediately demands to speak to the owner and that we're going to have to pay to have his car repainted, and he's not going to be paying for his gas. I try my best to calm the situation, but he's got a good rage going and doesn't want to be calmed down, damn it. While he's spewing forth, I noticed that an officer from the local police department is about to come into the store to get snacks or a drink or some such. This gave me a nice idea. "Sir, I'm afraid that the gas is in your tank and you pumped it yourself, so you're going to have to pay." Cutscene of an explosion. D-bag then asks, "So what exactly do you think you can do if I just go out and get in my car and leave?" Thank you, good lord, for timing. He says this at full bellow right as the officer walks through the door. My response? Well, personally, I can't do much, but the nice Westerlin police officer standing behind you will probably arrest you for second-degree theft. The D-bag turns around to see the officer with a very predatory smile on his face, nodding vigorously. Yeah, the guy shuts up, pays, and we never saw him again. I used to be a low-level manager in a call center. It paid the bills. Anyway, a customer had called us and been perfectly pleasant, giving us his account details, and business got underway. At the end of the call, he asked for one more thing that we couldn't do, and was informed as such. He immediately got extremely aggressive with my member of staff. At this point, her hand shot up in the air, cue me, and she handed over the headset and chair so we could view the details. I was called the B word, the C word, and various other names, and then we got down to the grand finale, the threat. I'm paraphrasing, but here's how it went. "Listen, B word, I can see your company's address on your website. I'm gonna come down there and F you up." At this point, I answer, "So it's a good thing you gave my colleague your name and address details first then. I'll make sure to hand them over to the police somewhere in the few hours it's going to take you to drive down here. We'll be waiting." Dial tone. And of course, many of you have also drawn the same conclusion that the narrator has, that this man, who we'll charitably call a gentleman rather than a revolting sack of crap, would almost certainly have never got as personal and threatening with his language if it was a man on the phone in the first place. What a member. Not me, but my former boss. I used to work in an old family-owned gas station and garage in a small town in butt-frick nowhere. Since it was family-owned and 90% of the business came from regulars who had either business accounts or got their family's cars fixed at the shop, and had for generations on both sides. As such, the random passers-by getting gas on their way to and from cities on either side of the town made a mostly negligible amount of business. The gas station side of the business made up maybe 2% of the business, and of that, maybe 0.5% was non-regulars. So my boss couldn't give less of a crap about some of the annoying customers who came in. One day, we got a particularly annoying soccer mum. This was during the summer a few years ago, so the gas was very high compared to the rest of the year. She was convinced that our pumps were purposely calibrated incorrectly so that less gas was pumped. Her proof was that she always got X amount in gas, and it always went to a certain percentage in her tank. Well, we'd just had them recalibrated for the year and knew it was all good. She kept complaining to me about it, and being a high schooler, I didn't give a flying frick. But I kept up appearances and was polite, and I kept telling her we'd just had them calibrated. She didn't care and kept complaining. Eventually, she asked for the manager. Well, the office was right behind the counter, and my boss was in there listening the whole time. As soon as she asked for him, he simply yelled, "F off!" And that was about it. I shrugged at her, and she left. My boss was awesome with jerks like that. I used to work in a deli restaurant, and this lady comes in and rudely orders her food. I told her that everything should come out all right and that I'll double-check for her to make sure her order would be correct. She insisted on getting lots of honey mustard on her sandwich. I typed in extra honey mustard on the ticket, and sure enough, when her order comes out, there seemed to be plenty on there. But when I deliver it, she whines at me for not having the extra honey mustard I promised, and told me to fricking get a ton more honey mustard for her. I go to the back of the store, I get an entire gallon jug of honey mustard and plop it on her table. Her friends were laughing and she was steaming mad. She complained to the manager, who thought it was hilarious and actually laughed in her face. I was eating at a Taco Bell once, and I was waiting to ask for some sauce while another customer was yelling at a kitchen employee. She had pulled apart her burrito and was complaining that there wasn't enough in it. I leaned over and said, "That looks like 89 cents worth of food to me." She stormed out. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. During high school, I worked at a Burger King. I've probably told a couple of stories about it before, but I don't think I've done this one yet. There was this one woman who would always come into drive-thru during the afternoon and ask for a Whopper Jr. with extra onions. I mean, a lot of extra onions. And no matter how many we put in, she always came into the store and complained there weren't enough. Still, this was in the middle of the afternoon, so we didn't normally care. However, one day we had 4 buses full of US Army enlistees at the store at the same time. Convoys of chartered buses would go by periodically, and they usually stopped at our store because the bus drivers knew my boss. Now, these people were always the nicest, most respectful people you could possibly imagine, which was a welcome change after dealing with jerks all day. They always ordered a ton of food, all king size, tons of double and triple Whoppers, and the whole 9 yards. My boss would always have me give them the senior discount of 15% off, and they enjoyed that immensely, because it said they were getting a senior discount on their receipts. Anyways, nice as they were, they strained our store to the limit because they ordered so much food. So we were almost literally going hammer and tongs to keep up. And then, Mrs. Annoying Lady comes into drive-thru. My boss just told us to grab 2 handfuls of onions and put them on the sandwich, because she didn't need a scene when we were as far behind as we were. I could barely close the fricker because of the onions, but I managed and we gave it to her. Now remember, the store is completely full of US Army enlistees. They've probably not had fast food for weeks. I think they were going from boot camp to get their first assignments. And the line was out the door. So Nasty Lady pushes her way past all of these people, rudely shoving them out of her way, and comes up to the counter screaming that she didn't have enough onions. My boss is annoyed, so she takes the sandwich, hands it to me, and tells me to do whatever the heck I want with it. I dump the entire fricking tub of onions on this, probably about 1.5 liters of onions, and I wrap it up really, really tight and tape it shut. Note that the wrappers were somewhat elastic. My boss hands it to the lady and she opens it right on the corner to make sure we have enough, even though the package is like 6 times bigger than normal. The thing fricking exploded all over her. So awesome. All the troops were trying not to laugh. One of their officers, a quite young first lieutenant, was waiting by the counter for his food, and finally he just gave up and started laughing his butt off. The troops took this as a cue, and she had about 250 soldiers all dying laughing at her. One of the best days of my high school life. She didn't come back for a month, and she never ever complained about not having enough onions again. In short, jerk woman complains about having too few onions, and I rig her modified sandwich to explode in her face. Onion geyser for the win. She gets laughed at by more than 200 troops. The narrator is somewhat unclear on how exactly this worked, but honestly, it's always good to hear about these delusional nutbags being humbled in front of large crowds. Complaining was almost certainly just a way of getting attention, so mission accomplished, B-word. I used to work for a grocery store in high school as a cashier. One busy Saturday, an older lady came through my line with about $150 worth of groceries. Among her items was a pre-packaged piece of meat from our deli that is normally priced by weight. Her meat did not have a printed sticker on the package, and I would have needed to find a bag boy or manager to run to the deli to get it priced. Because we were super busy, I decided to wing it and set it on my scale. Looks like it's almost a pound, so let's say $2.77. Does that sound fair? I began to ring it as a miscellaneous item. "No, that doesn't sound fair," she yelled. "You need to get that priced." Groans from the line began behind her as I found a bag boy to run to get the price sticker. A manager came by to see what the commotion was about, and the lady explained the situation. I explained why I'd made the decision I made, and the manager of course stuck up for the old lady, which we laughed about later, and she accepted the apology. We then waited for what seemed like an eternity of eye contact avoidance and thumb twiddling. The bag boy came back and handed me the pork. I smirked and showed her the price. $2.78. I would have saved you a penny. The man behind her chortled. Never saw her again. I stopped to get gas today, and while talking with the cashier, I mentioned that she was probably tired of people yelling at her about the price of gas, but that since she's the one standing there, she probably gets it a lot. She said that every day someone complains to her like she can do something about it. A guy then came in and demanded, "Why the hell is gas $3.76 a gallon?" Without missing a beat, she said, "Because it went down 10 cents this morning." He just looked at her, paid, and left. I worked in electronics at Target. Over at guest service, I saw a woman with her teenage daughter heatedly speaking to the guy at the counter. After a few minutes, he pointed over at me in electronics. The woman's head whirled around dragon-like toward me. The rest of her body realigned with her head and she stomped in my direction. When she reached the counter, I pleasantly asked, "How can I help you?" She slammed a receipt and a PS3 controller on the counter. "I paid $55 for this and I can only return it for $40. I asked, "Can I see your receipt?" She nodded and I picked it up. "See? $55. "Yeah, I see that," I said. "You bought this last week when the store gave away a $15 gift certificate with the controller." "So what? You'd shop at Target again, right?" I asked. "Not if this isn't resolved," she spat. Her daughter next to her was embarrassed. "Hypothetically, if there wasn't an issue, I'm guessing you would use the $15 gift card on your future purchase. If we let you return this controller for $55, then you would have a free $15. That is why the return price is $15 less. I can do the return for you over here if you don't want to go back to guest service." "I didn't want to return it, I just wanted to know why the return price was so much less," she said. She picked up her controller and receipt and began to walk off. Her daughter, clearly ashamed of her mother, thanked me and followed her mother out. I used to work in Best Buy services. It was sort of like Geek Squad before Geek Squad, and it dealt with everything like TVs and VCRs and junk. One day we had a guy come in and complain about his little video camera not working. I agree to take a look at it even though there's not much I can do but send it back to the manufacturer for him. It'll take some time, but that was 90% of the problem people had with services. Naturally, this guy wants a new one on the spot and he starts getting really loud about it. So I call the manager because I can't even take a leak in Best Buy without getting manager approval, and while I'm waiting for the manager to come up, I'm still tinkering with the camera in the back. I get some tools out and, hey, look, I got the thing open for the guy. A minute or so later, I come back out when the manager gets there. The manager is talking to the guy as I move a computer up to the counter. I jump in and say, "Hey, I don't think we should give this guy a new unit." The guy gives me dagger eyes and the manager is like, "Oh, why's that?" I then play the footage of what is unmistakably someone running around a pool, dropping the camera which tumbles into said pool. He'd taken out the tape, but it was recorded to the memory stick. The guy takes his camera and quietly leaves the store. It was worth 2 years of an otherwise pretty annoying job. Busted. I'm just sad that he likely took this immediately to another store, sans the memory stick. But at least he wasted his time for a bit longer. Used to work in a pawn shop. We got lots of jewelry in, and a lot of times the person bringing the jewelry would have no idea that some of their stuff was fake. 9 times out of 10, they'd get annoyed and leave their stuff with us to be thrown out. My coworker accidentally left a really gaudy but fake gold chain out on the desk one day. A customer came in, noticed the chain, and told us we'd better put it away before someone stole it. I was about to, but then I realized I could have some fun. We ended up leaving the chain on the desk and would casually watch people as they came in to do business. We caught a number of people trying to steal the chain. One guy in particular was talking us up and gradually pulling the chain off the counter. When he'd successfully pocketed it and left the store, my coworker and I began to crack up. Sure enough, about a week later the guy came back in with the chain that he stole and tried to sell it to us. When I refused to buy it, he got annoyed, but then we showed him the security cam footage of him stealing it. We weren't even angry. Someone that dumb deserves to live his life that way until he walks in front of a bus or into a wood chipper. I work in a shoe shop. One of the services we supply is to check how well school shoes fit on our younger customers. Once a staff member has signed to say they're a good fit, the customer is able to bring them back if there are any problems. This one time, a mother came back in with her son a week after being fitted with a pair, loudly mouthing off that the shoes were too tight and causing blisters. Even though she was being a psycho hose beast about it, we offered to get her a new pair. Once back in the kids department, she spotted the girl who'd fitted the original shoes and she went pants on head insane at her, demanding that the girl should be there whilst a better pair was fitted so she wouldn't make the same mistake again. Despite the mum saying some pretty degrading stuff about her, the girl agreed to sit in on the refit in an attempt to help out. She remembered the customer, even to the point of remembering the kid's name, and was visibly upset about doing a bad job. Returning to the counter, the fitter offered to put the exchange through as a final gesture of goodwill, and then froze with an awesome crap-eating grin on her face. "These aren't your son's shoes," she said to the customer. They have a tag inside saying Tommy and your son's name is Billy. It turns out the kid had swapped his shoes with another boy in his class. We laughed that woman out of the shop. What industry is way more shifty than people realize? Trucking. The margins are razor thin, and so everyone is trying to nickel and dime each other constantly. The drivers lie to their dispatchers, the dispatchers lie to the brokers lie to the clients. All of this for like $50 to $100 sometimes. Some will give their drivers time limits that they can't make without speeding, but make speeding tickets the driver's responsibility. And I've also heard on the internet that some install governors that prevent you from going over a certain speed limit. Then there's the laws on how long you can drive and how long a break you need to take before driving again. Those often don't get followed. Dietary supplements. It's gotten better, but there's still a lot of half-truths and whole lies. Not all that long ago, it was seriously like the wild, wild west. Dentistry, particularly dental chains like Aspen Dental, Bright Now, Affordable Dentures, Coast, among others. When I worked for Aspen, every office had to meet its financial goal at the end of the month. Oftentimes, this meant exaggerating a patient's treatment plan and scaring them into unnecessary, expensive surgeries, like a 15-year-old getting a full mouth extraction and put into dentures. My comment is based on my experiences in corporate dentistry, especially Aspen. There are plenty of excellent dentists who work at these chains, you just have to find them. My issue is mostly with the business model and the high-pressure salespeople with no medical backgrounds whatsoever. Just do your research, ask questions, get everything in writing, and be proactive. If you do these things, you'll be fine. I don't want my comment to scare anyone away from going to the dentist, which is an important thing to do. I once worked for a dentist who told us that everyone who walked in the doors has gum disease. Everyone. And the assistants would compete to see who could get the most people to agree to an oral cancer screening. Are you 25 years old and never smoked a cigarette or drunk alcohol? Great! You absolutely need an oral cancer screening because Shannon really wants that Starbucks gift card. Shady billing and insurance claims, straight-up fraud, charges tacked onto bills that weren't discussed, like a $150 electric toothbrush that you never agreed to purchasing. I ran far away from that place and never looked back. I interviewed for Affordable and got an offer, but it's the same racket. God, you'd think that the one person you want not to be shady is the person sticking sharp metal implements in your mouth and then pausing to quote you exactly how much it's all going to cost when they see the problem. We're all one checkup away from being taken hostage and held at knife or dental point tip for our money. The tattoo industry isn't necessarily shady, but there are some major gaps between good artists and crappy ones. I've worked with straight-up smackheads who I wouldn't let draw on me in marker. Yet year after year they find work in shops. Always check the portfolio and talk to the artist, and if they seem sketchy or disinterested, you nope the frick right out of there. Even the portfolio might not be a good indicator. I went to what I thought was a reputable shop, pre-Yelp and Google reviews. It was recommended by my ex, who had some gorgeous work on her. I was new to the area, and he had great work, so I went with it. Went in, and the guy at the counter set me up with a tattooist. The guy had a great portfolio, and we set up a date for me to come in the following day. It was a smaller piece, pretty simple. Got it done, and it looked great. For about a minute. It took a couple of days, but that thing began to heal, and it was a blown-out piece of trash afterwards. I went back to the shop, and the guy that set me up with the tattoo guy was there. I showed him and complained, and he's like, "Yep, Friday was his last day. We let him go because we've been getting that complaint." So those motherfrickers knew that he was bad and didn't care and put me into an appointment without him knowing it was his last day. That's the one tattoo I've kind of regretted. The credit card industry. There's a whole high-risk segment of the industry dedicated to preying on young people, old people, or people with bad financial histories and issuing them cards at extremely high interest rates. If you have a crappy credit score, be wary of any credit card offers you get. I read that the supplement industry lobbied hard in the 90s to make sure that Congress didn't pass an act which would require the FDA to actually look into whether a supplement is safe, effective, or reliable. They even showed ads on TV using the whole government overreach angle. Unfortunately, the law was never passed. So now the supplement industry can just churn out crap that improves heart health or helps memory, and don't have to have those statements undergo any kind of verification. One of the individuals who wanted to pass regulation for the supplement industry also dealt with the tobacco industry and was quoted saying something along the lines of, "The tobacco industry was a piece of cake next to the supplement industry." Marketing and advertising. We can track and buy so much data on people to directly place specific ads. I can track the locations of cell phones and send ads based on the places you've physically been, even if it isn't directly related to my business. This may seem fairly obvious, but the entire real estate industry is awash in overseas and laundered money in the United States, to the point that several markets would totally crash without these buyers. Everyone knows, and no one cares. Olive oil. The amount of counterfeit olive oil is insanely higher than you think. You have a higher chance of buying olive oil that's been cut than buying real olive oil. Education. People are constantly trying to find ways to line their pockets instead of focusing on the students. And I say this while working for what I consider to be one of the better school districts in my state. Funerals and caskets. Nothing like preying on grieving survivors to try and sell them the most glorious, satin-lined mahogany box to plant their loved one in the ground. As a quick PSA for those of you who want to donate your body, my family has been using medcure.org for full body or non-transplant donations. Usable organs and tissues go to hospitals and research facilities. Anything remaining is cremated and the ashes are either distributed at sea or returned to the family. All of this at no cost to the donor. $0. My mum's cremation, documentation, and return of ashes alone cost us over $2,000. As a child of depression and lifelong penny pincher, she would have been frickin' furious about that. My brother and dad had registered with Medcure, so for them, we got 0 cremation expenses, no stress about what to do immediately following their death. We were much happier to spend money on the memorial event. If you're not bound by spiritual or cultural death rituals, or prefer a frugal lifestyle, or want to benefit scientific research, look into non-transplant full-body donation. And I guess thanks to the honorable funeral industry folks who aren't gouging folks for every last penny. People who go in for a traditional burial method will almost certainly appreciate what you do. Listen, future family of the narrator, I don't care what you do with my handsome rotting corpse after I've vacated my own cranium. Do whatever's cheapest for you, or preferably whatever lets you get a bit more money to take care of yourself after I'm gone. Sold to a group of corpse bride reenactment perverts? Sure. Black market organ dealers? Great! Just make sure the price is right. It does not matter to me at all. The fashion industry. They rely on third world factories to make their products and pay them a pittance. Then they sell their products on for 10 times the price they pay the salary for their staff and factory workers. Then they burn, yes, literally burn clothing that doesn't sell because they don't want luxury items flooding the market and therefore lowering its value. There was a really good documentary I caught on Netflix called The True Cost About the Fashion Industry, specifically the low-cost throwaway fashion culture that exists in most first-world countries today. It was really eye-opening to say the least. I never sat down and considered the significant environmental implications of the clothes we buy, and it definitely got me thinking more about my personal consumer habits. There's a reason why you can get those cool, nerdy screen print t-shirts for about $7, and those reasons are scary. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Knowledge of this isn't nearly as common as it should be. Mobile video games are literally designed to be frustrating instead of fun. There was a South Park episode about this not too terribly long ago, which I found to be incredibly accurate. Sadly, it didn't make quite the same splash that I'd hoped it would, given that quite a few people still aren't aware of what's going on. See, a great many mobile titles make use of mechanics that are put together with the intention of nurturing habitual behavior, frustrating a user, and then offering a slightly more enjoyable experience after money has been spent. The monetization model is created first, and then the game elements are built around it. This tactic has proven to be a more profitable model than actually offering entertainment, to the point where some companies take very careful steps to ensure that their games don't accidentally end up being fun. That sounds like satire, I know, but it's actually true. As an example, EA released a mobile Sims game and holy crap, it was bad. The game was fun to play, but the only hang-up was that everything your sim did took real-life hours to do. Meaning, if I wanted to do a certain mission that required me to, say, send my sim to work, I would literally send him to work and wait 8 real-life hours for him to come back. But you could speed it up using real money. The breaking point was when they had special events that allowed me to get an exclusive accessory from my town that I really wanted. I started doing the missions required to get it, and right when I had one mission left, I ran out of time. The event ended. No frickin' joke, you had to devote all of your free time to this crappy frickin' game to get your reward, and if you so much as went an hour without making your sim do the next task, you were screwed unless you coughed up $5 to make Bob the Sim take a crap. I deleted the game and never looked back. That kind of formula doesn't work for any game, and I don't want to have to wait several real hours to do something in the game. I want to play the frickin' game and not be cut off right when the action begins. Imagine playing the new Red Dead Redemption, except right in the middle of the shootout, the game cuts you off and says, "You must wait 5 hours to continue, or give us your actual hard-earned money so you can play the game. Otherwise, catch you later then." Frick that. I'd rather slap $60 on the checkout counter and just get the full game so that I can play it on my own time. The rest of this Am I the Genius video will automatically unlock in 33 minutes and 3 seconds. Spend 89 YouTube bucks to speed up? I mean, to be fair, you have to wait what feels like 5 hours to do a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm on my second playthrough of that game and I'm still not sure whether the whole real-life simulator aspect of the game is a strength or just really annoying. But yes, to return to the main point, mobile games have been cheap, nasty scams ever since they just cut away from the model where all they did was show you ads. Collections. Yes, I know most people assume they're shady, but I don't think most people know just how shady. There are clear laws in the US defining what a collections agency can and can't do, how often they can contact you, what sort of pressure they can apply, what they can threaten you with, among other things. These laws are not ambiguous, they leave little or no wiggle room, and yet low-rent agencies violate them all the time. They'll buy debt for pennies on the dollar that's past the statute of limitations, meaning it's not legal to collect on it, and then start calling the debtor and harassing them for payment. They'll call debtors and threaten them with legal action, tell them that a process server is on the way to their house, that the IRS is going to audit them, that their wages will be garnished and assets seized. All blatant lies meant to scare the person into paying up. And I'm not talking about scammers from India here. I'm talking about legally registered collection agencies right here in the US. So how do they get away with this? Because the vast majority of people don't know their rights. They're already dealing with the stress and shame of being deep in debt with no way to pay it off. So if someone who sounds authoritative calls them up and lists all of the terrible things that are going to happen, they just assume that's correct. And the few times that someone knows enough to fight back, the worst that happens is that the collection agency pays a fine of a few $1,000s. That's usually covered by their liability insurance, and even if it isn't, it's just the cost of doing business. Small price to pay for the cash they're raking in. And if they really get slammed, they can just close up shop and reopen under a different name. It's a really sleazy business with a lot of bad actors. I don't know about most people, but the home security industry is pretty shady. Shades. No, really, most of the branded ones are owned by a single company called Luxottica. It's a monopoly. Worse, they own a crap ton of prescription frames as well. Imagine if you needed a wheelchair, but the only people who made wheelchairs were Ferrari and they started at 40 grand. Specifically in the US and sporadically in other countries, academia. Yes, it does function like an industry, again specifically in the US, and it can get really, really damn shady. Public research-oriented universities are mostly above board, but the further you drift away from that, the shadier it gets. Diploma mills are a well-known phenomenon, but there are also plenty of legitimate or semi-legitimate establishments offering continuing education or distance education diplomas that are both expensive and not really worth the paper they're written on. Labor relations at most universities, including reputable ones, are okay, but becoming increasingly messed up. Part-time, dead-end teaching contracts are increasingly popular, and their conditions for the employee range from crappy to Dickensian. The US agriculture industry. It's illegal to record videos or take pictures in slaughterhouses, yet in the UK, it's required by law. Car sales. I install computers at car dealerships. The salespeople don't pay attention to me while I work because I'm not a customer. I overhear them talking so much crap about all their customers to the point where it's sad. It seems like they're always trying to rip people off. Blood donation centers are shady as frick. The source? A guy who's a former branch manager here. One Blood and other blood buses are super shady. Employees are trained that every donor is a hero and that they're saving local lives. Horse crap. The blood is sold overseas to weird companies. The pint of blood a donor donated is worth several $100s depending on the day. The donor gets a t-shirt that we printed by the millions for pennies on the dollar. Blood centers make mega money, lie to donors, and treat employees like animals. Yikes! I wonder if this is better monitored in other countries outside the United States, because the narrator knows a lot of people who give blood. Here's hoping. You won't believe how shady the clickbait industry is. Okay, before I actually get into this topic, I need to clarify a couple of things. Yes, there's really a clickbait industry, and yes, it's largely distinct from the world of online periodicals. I work for an outlet that straddles the line between the two, meaning that we actually create and publish real and original content, but we occasionally have to employ some less than desirable tactics in order to stay afloat. Said tactics include allowing questionable sites and services to advertise on our pages, putting vague but attention-grabbing headlines on fairly mundane pieces, and repurposing older content for use in new articles and videos. Now, let me tell you about the actual clickbait industry. There are sites, thousands upon thousands of them in fact, which work as kind of redirect networks, for a lack of a better term. You've probably stumbled into one of them in the past. Something mildly interesting shows up somewhere that you frequent, usually promising a story that seems just slightly shocking at first glance. If you click on the link, you're brought to a page that features dozens of these stories, each of which is accompanied by a thumbnail that not so subtly hints at something more intriguing. Clicking again will bring you into another such index, and then another, until sometimes, if you're very lucky, you'll be brought to a legitimate site which has unwittingly paid to advertise via the wrong channels. More often than not, though, your final destination will be a poorly written, single-paragraph description of a photograph that was purchased from a paparazzi website, which is once again saturated in ads. Okay, so what's the big deal, you might be asking? They're just pulling revenue out of stupid people. That's true, and that's one of their primary goals, but it isn't the only one. See, each of those clicks gathers a little bit of information, all of which is assembled into a kind of profile. Said profile is then used to target specific articles and ads at the people making their way through this online labyrinth, dangling tailored bait in front of their noses. Depending on the network, that bait may include political propaganda, misinformation, and even outright scams, with what a visitor sees being largely determined by what they've already said in what they want with their choices thus far. Here's an example. A person visits a website and they see a story about a young female celebrity having a malfunctioning wardrobe. They click the link, which brings them to a site that resembles an adult thumbnail page from the early 2000s, albeit featuring celebrity gossip, technology news, and a host of other topics. The promised article about the famous exposed chest is included somewhere on the second or third line, in between one about a real-life lightsaber and one about an anti-aging technique. Our hapless visitor, having decided that the lightsaber sounds more interesting, clicks on that link and gets brought to still another thumbnail page. This continues for another jump or two, and at the end, the algorithm behind the site knows that it's dealing with a male in his early to mid-20s who lives alone and prefers dogs over cats. The further down you go, the more insidious it gets, and if our wayward internet wanderer then goes back to the original site where this all started, he'll see a new advertisement waiting, this one having been tailored specially for him. You might think that you're immune to this sort of thing. Maybe you assume that your ad blocker protects you, or maybe you're just too shrewd to fall down the rabbit hole. Still though, doesn't that lightsaber-induced wardrobe malfunction sound like something you should see? In short, the clickbait industry is even shadier than you think. Click the link in the above comment to find out how. Car dealerships are the worst. In a lot of places in the States, you can't order directly from the factories and legally have to buy through a dealership, and the dealerships will take a big cut of that. Also, in my state, the big car dealerships successfully lobbied to make buying a car illegal on Sunday, and although I can't remember how it worked, the unofficial reason for it was because it would hurt smaller dealerships. Thankfully, I think most people realize they're pretty shady. The construction industry. You'd be amazed how much contractors try to cut corners and do shady crap to save on money. You know that joke about people standing around watching others work? Yeah, they're actually working too, specifically making sure the guys doing the construction aren't cheating. In a world without construction regulation and enforcement, your house gets a big frickin' crack in it due to crappy soil work, and now you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that fixed. What is the big secret of your hometown? I don't know if it's considered an especially dark secret, but in the county I lived in from the ages of 10 through 18, we had a soldier die under some extremely questionable circumstances. They said he was inebriated or experiencing some kind of mental distress and raided a plant nursery. They claimed he was attacked by wasps and ran. He called 911 several times and claimed that someone was chasing him and was trying to kidnap him. In the last call to the emergency services, he said everything was fine suddenly. Just 14 or 15 minutes later, he was struck by a woman who stopped and called 911. He was run over 2 more times and then died. The autopsy showed no signs of bee or wasp stings. The connection to the nursery is due to the fact that it was just up the road from where he died. The place was ransacked, pizza eaten, and money taken, but his wallet and phone were sitting on the counter undisturbed. However, the family was not okay with that explanation, especially because he had previously texted that there were some problems with the local boys, since the soldier wasn't from this part of the state. So the family had a private investigator look into it. They analyzed the 911 recordings and found several instances of other people talking in the background, though most of it couldn't be made out. Except one. In the 911 call where he told the operator that everything was fine, a male voice could be heard saying, "Tell her." And the nursery? There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints that led back to the soldier, even though his phone and wallet were there in the building. A lot of people, his family included, think he was killed by some of the local guys there after he got into a fight about something. They chased him down and caught him. He was able to run again after the final 911 call and was hit by a driver while trying to get help. And the police in the county covered the entire thing up because the boys involved were connected to the department somehow. Of the 3 drivers, none were charged for hitting or running him over. I think only the first driver even stopped, but it was discovered that one of the drivers was connected to the department either through family or friendship. It's a crazy story, but you can look it up. Just search Austin McGough. I wouldn't be too surprised since there's a lot of shady crap happening in small-town police departments, including covering up unspeakable act offenses that officers commit. I really hope his family gets him justice. Yep, being a figure with that amount of power in a small isolated town is a real recipe for corruption and unassailable authority figures. There are very few checks and balances out in the middle of butt-frick nowhere. A freshman who was also on the spectrum was known to have a really rough life with his family at home. He was a problem child and got in trouble on purpose, but no one punished him too harshly because of his home life. He was a well-loved kid at school and in the community, actually. One day, just before the holiday break in December, he was really ill, but his mum sent him to school anyway. She locked him out of the house. He decided to try and get into one of the empty houses down the street through the chimney. Now, this kid was the size of a second grader, but he was too big to fit through since chimneys taper down thinner. Mum never answered her phone when the school reported him missing, went a whole day without reporting her kid, and no one knew what happened to him. It was about a month and a half before we knew what actually went down. We all thought he ran away, was alive somewhere, or maybe went to his sister's house. Nope, dead in a chimney. The school organized an entire week of counseling and such. They wore pink for a day and handed out little pink ribbons on pins for him since his favorite color was pink. Everyone was hit really hard by it. That's how our small town started 2020. It hasn't got any better, as you can see, so it's weird that it's been almost a year now. We had a crazy rich guy from the 16 or 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night and decided that when he died he'd be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years or so, and requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so that he could get out but no one could get back in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune and belongings would have to give them back when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones and his house is a dentist now. This is also the town where that lady went viral going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi in 2020. This is more comical than dark. A house burned down in the small town of 600, 1 block from the fire station. It being a volunteer fire department, nobody was actually at the station. They tried to get the pumper truck out, but one of the volunteers had run it into a brick building the week before, and it was still at the shop. We're still undecided whether the house owner burned it down for the insurance. The strange thing was, there was nothing valuable inside. 15 years ago, the local district attorney called his longtime girlfriend and told her he was taking the day off from work and that he loved her. He parked his car in town and went for a stroll past the local shops. He hasn't been seen since. His car was found where he had parked it the next day. He had left his cell phone in the car, but his keys and wallet were missing. Later that year, his laptop, sans its hard drive, was found under a bridge at a nearby river. The hard drive was eventually discovered by a local woman walking along the bank of the river, but it was too damaged to recover any data from it. Interestingly, investigators discovered that someone had done a search on his home computer for how to wreck a hard drive. Did he jump from a local bridge? Did he encounter someone who had prosecuted who did him harm? Or did he escape his life to start a new one? About 10 years ago, a lot of homeless people disappeared, and when the police did the investigation, they found out a guy was kidnapping and eating those people. Police found his hideout and found a half-eaten body and bones from another person. People don't like to talk about it, but everyone knows what happened. Ooh, I have a doozy. Short version, popular kid in high school runs a secret towel fight club and accidentally kills one of their friends in the house of a local politician, who then proceeds to bury the story. Towel fight club is like taping towels over your hands and beating each other up. It's supposed to just be boxing, but it sounds like they got out of control and hardly could call it that. Oh, this is a sad one to me. There was an older couple here who ran a halfway house for troubled kids, who had recently gotten out of juvie. They fostered a few as well. They were loved in the community, wonderful people. One of the kids had an older brother who was a gang member in the nearest big city. During a visit, he snuck his 15-year-old younger brother a piece. The younger bro ended up holding up a local gas station and killed 3 people. One of them was my friend's cousin. The foster parents lost whatever credentials they needed to do what they did. The kids went back into the foster system, and the giant house has been abandoned since 2009. There's a half-submerged submarine from the war in the bay where I live. You can walk out to it when the tide is out. In the late 80s, someone cut open the hatch, one of the only visible parts left sticking out of the sand, then climbed in and was having a look around. The tide came in, and he drowned. If I remember correctly, the whole hatch was filled with cement and then welded shut to stop it happening again. I mean, right up until I read about what happened to the guy, the narrator was just thinking about how cool it would be to go inside a submarine ruin like that. So yeah, I'd probably have drowned too. Sympathize. The town I was raised in wasn't exactly small, but here's the one dark secret I know. My hometown was where lots and lots of sports players had their mansions. And so, of course, their wives and children were out and about in the community a lot. Every single sports player wife in that town was or is heavily addicted to opioids. Every single one. That addiction is obviously an epidemic all over the country, but among the rich wives in that town, it had a 100% infection rate, so to speak. I know because one of my friend's mums was the hairdresser for basically every single one of those wives. I was homeless my senior year of high school, and one of the sports players' wives heard about me from her, and she gifted me an iPhone. That phone was pennies to her, but I still wish I'd expressed my thanks more, because that wife died from taking too much of that particular substance not long after. Sorry if that isn't much of a dark secret, but yeah. Our local pizza place was a known clan hub. Everyone knew it, and still to this day, if you Google the town's name and the initials of the clan, the first thing that pops up is this pizza shop. They had some really gross pizza, too. Back in the 80s, a couple were driving a motorcycle when they were stopped by 3 men, who then committed the unspeakable act on the woman while forcing her husband to watch. Then they unalived both of them, except the woman played dead after they killed her husband, ran and told the police. The police caught the gang not so long after. That same night that they were caught, a mob of 2,000 people gathered in front of the police department, broke in, and told the sheriff, "You guys did an excellent job, now leave it to us." The mob broke the cell where the 3 men were, beat them up and attached them alive into cars and dragged them for 4 miles to a park in the middle of the city where they set them on fire, still alive, while everyone was clapping and cheering. Almost nobody talks about it now, but there's even a video of it. The mayor of the town that I live just outside of was murdered by his girlfriend a while back, and there was a realtor that was using his company as a front for smuggling smack. Other than that, it's the usual small-town southern crap. When I was growing up, my small town had a spate of murders, about 6 in as many months. This was in the 70s, nothing like it before or after. We have a vineyard hill next to our village. On that hill there's a big wooden cross. Lots of people go there to drink, have a walk or with their dogs, but no one else knows why the cross is there. During the war, a vineyard keeper lived there with his son. His son was recruited and the man was left alone. When the war ended, his son survived and wanted to prank his dad by sneaking up on him at night. But the vineyard keeper saw him and thought he was a robber, so he grabbed his rifle and shot the robber. When he found out it was his son, it broke his heart. He dug a grave on top of the hill for his son and erected a big wooden cross next to the grave. When he was done, he laid next to his son and used the same weapon to end things himself. From that day, no one worked on the vineyards, and there's a big wooden cross on top of the hill. Now you can't even recognize that there's a grave there. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Some high school football players shoved broomsticks up freshman players' butts in the locker rooms after a practice. The coach found out and did nothing about it. The whole town knew, and nothing happened to anyone in the form of punishment. Every game for the rest of the year, the opposing team's fans brought broomsticks to the games. About 40% of my hometown was homeless. No one had jobs, no one could afford any kind of housing situation. Neighbors paid for heat where they could on houses that people were squatting in, and everyone invited everyone else over for dinner every night. We didn't know who was homeless, we just did it. We hired anyone and everyone for odd jobs. A lot of people just lived as they would when they were kids. Keep the fireplace going with the trees you chopped down, gather water by the well and trade, farm, or trap for food. I went to school with a lot of homeless kids. We had, looking back, the most robust school breakfast program I've ever heard of. I thought it was normal for over half the school to show up until I moved to the city. You just gave people the dignity they deserved. No one was shamed if they dropped out at grade 10. We all knew that if they needed the job, they should take it. Looking back, I realize how wild it is. Our town was so poor, and no one was treated any different by me and mine, at least. Sure, there were some rich people, but they overwhelmingly went to the other school. And there were no panhandlers, no beggars, nothing like that. I was just told the Buseys were coming over for dinner. Did I like them? No, I kinda think they were jerks. But never did I make them feel uncomfortable, and most just ate, had some tea, and left. And if that doesn't tickle your fancy, a whale washed up on shore one week, and all the guys in the local high school took turns doing the deed with it. All of them. To clarify, the whale part happened after I graduated by a few years. It was a very public thing when it was happening, and no one likes to talk about it since then. I must say that was a really uplifting story of community, solidarity, and a testament to the kindness humanity are capable of when we're in tough situations. Then, the last 2 sentences were the most wild right turn, which is hilarious, but did go some way to unraveling all of the good work done up until that point. As a teen in high school, the health teacher got caught being very inappropriate with a student. Everyone magically passed that year, including me, who skipped almost every day. Then a few years ago in another small town, 2 different scandals within the space of 5 years. First one, teachers at a preschool were dosing the children with melatonin at nap time, and the second one, a very well-known and respected funeral home, went under investigation for selling body parts. I've got 3. We have a prison for young delinquents in our town. Back in the 80s, a student escaped and broke into an elderly couple's home. He strangled and did the unspeakable act to the wife in front of her wheelchair-bound husband. He then beat up the old man, but I don't know if that guy died or not. Next one, a young woman was running our high school track and a student went outside and shanked her to death using a metal compass. And finally, in the 80s, a son of a New York Police Department detective shanked a mid-20s woman to death in her driveway over 40 times. There was a huge manhunt for the guy. My parents tell me the rumor was that the woman's husband was gay and having an affair with the man. But there's also a rumor that the man unalived his own wife and that the guy was convicted was just an easy target based on his mental capacity and reputation. I actually met the guy over the summer during an investigation I was doing. I'm a private investigator. The guy was definitely strange, but then again he was in prison for 20 years. A girl I went to high school with just vanished one day. From day one, everyone was telling the police that her ex had something to do with it. She already had a restraining order because he held a knife to her and threatened to kidnap her, but with no evidence, they couldn't do anything. Over the years, several people went to the police saying that he'd admitted to killing her, but they did nothing. He eventually got in trouble for threatening to kill another girlfriend and actually attacking her and went to prison for 3 years. After prison, he came back to town and eventually asked another ex of his for a ride home from a party. And then she went missing after that night, and they found her car burned, and they arrested him again and he had burns on his hands. A few months later, someone found a set of remains outside of town, and during the recovery they found another set of much older remains. He killed them both, and the failure of our local police department caused the second girl to be murdered. A new police chief's bachelor party was held at the local adult exotic dance club. It was videoed when video was new. The cops broke in looking for the tape, which was also recorded. The new chief lost the job within a month. There were rumors that there was a secret passage from the village's churchyard to the coal cellar on our grounds, which were used by Jews to hide and flee from the Reich. Not sure if that qualifies as dark. Some guy that owned a froyo shop knocked one of his female employees unconscious and she woke up inside this soundproof room in said yogurt shop, bound up and wearing a diaper. She managed to escape and get the cops called. This one guy, blue collar but running for a local political office, comes home to his wife of 7 years, finds her doing the deed with some guy. He whips out a piece and shoots the guy a few times. The man survives. He finds out that his wife was cheating on him and it wasn't the unspeakable act. Here's where it gets dirty though. So the police want to press charges against him for attempted murder, since they say he knew his wife played around. So the DA comes to him and tells him to stop running for office and withdraw. He does, and the charges magically go away. No crime here, folks. Does anyone remember a few years back when a bunch of people were dying of lung diseases caused by illegal THC vape cartridges? Well, turns out the guy I went to high school with was running one of the biggest THC cartridge operations in the Midwest, if not the entire country. His mum and brother were in on it too and had multiple locations where they were paying people to manufacture, pack, and distribute said cartridges. Maybe not so much dark as wild. When I was in the first grade, a guy called the police from multiple different phones, saying there was an explosive device in each of the schools in the town. 3 elementary, 1 middle, and 1 high school. And all of these schools were evacuated. Turns out, while the entire police force was split up, he robbed a bank and got away with it. Don't go getting ideas, listeners. Honestly, I'm just glad that the cops prioritized the safety of the students over the money in the banks. It's refreshing. The bank was probably insured against that kind of thing anyway. Hopefully, nobody got hurt. Looking through my hometown's history is a wild ride. About a decade ago, there was a crime spike here. It was really bad because one cartel tried to displace the other. And because we're a sleepy town across the border from the US, we're prime cartel real estate. However, when they weren't tearing each other up in the streets, they would abduct, interrogate, kill, and dispose of the bodies of their rivals until eventually one cartel managed to keep the town. One thing that baffled the authorities was their stealth. They came out of nowhere, struck their target, and vanished into the shadows. That may be possible for a small unit or even a lone agent, but that's unheard of in a cartel. Federal investigations were made and no one was able to find the cartel's HQ. It had to be big because they had weapons, vehicles, metal shops, dormitories, kitchens, and the corpse disposal equipment. They looked everywhere. Nearby ranches, warehouse, junkyards, nothing. Until, that is, they looked where no one thought to look. A few kilometers outside of here is a fully operational state prison that they were using as their HQ. Everyone was in on it, from the inmates to the guards, to the warden, to the governor. People were killed there, burnt to ashes inside steel drums, and the ashes were thrown in a river a few kilometers away. Over 100 people were disposed of this way. Forensic authorities have combed the river, finding small bone fragments and testing their DNA. As of 2016, 9 have been identified. There is a dispute over the governor responsible. At that time, the governor of the state was Humberto Moreira. However, he resigned before finishing his term so he could run for another office which he lost. Because he resigned, a provisional governor was assigned named Jorge Torres. During this time, there was an absolute media silence regarding the matter, either because of bureaucratic stonewalling, cartel threats, or government payoffs. However, a national magazine called Proceso wrote an article about the crimes being committed in the state, and Moreira ordered all copies of the magazine removed from newsstands there. When the problems in the state started to surface, both governors left the country. Moreira got a scholarship to study in Spain, which no one was able to identify the source of, and he also lived in a chalet that had a monthly rent higher than his salary as a governor. Meanwhile, Torres fled to the US. Moreira managed to transfer the blame of all wrongdoings of his administration onto Torres. Moreira was arrested by the Interpol a few years back, charged with money laundering. Incredible as it may seem, the Spanish authorities handed him over to Mexico, where he's lived as a free man, going as far as to create his own political party. No charges of any crime have ever been brought on him, and he maintains his claim of innocence. Since his return, he's never left the country. To mock his claim, one senator went so far as to invite him to the Super Bowl, with all expenses paid. Moreira, fearing the Interpol, passed on the invitation. The senator tweeted a picture of the empty seat. Meanwhile, Torres was caught in the US and also faced charges of money laundering. He pleaded guilty in the summer of this year. It's worth noting that Torres' testimony gives details as to the cartel's operations during Moreira's administration, including the protection they received and the times, dates, and sums of bribes paid. The Mexican government never included these statements as part of their investigation. What job do you have that sounds completely made up? This is a job I had in high school and early college years. I was a lifeguard response tester. I'd go to public pools or lakes with a lifeguard. Then I would pretend to drown and see how well they handled the situation. It was fun, except for when they'd fail and I had to walk over telling them, I was drowning for about 10 minutes out there. One woman tried to help me before the lifeguard realized once, and I just had to go with it. She did a mighty fine job. And others would just yell for the lifeguard. I go into a big vault for the Reserve Bank of New Zealand and I burn money. Every day, thousands of banknotes go to phase out the old ones to make way for the new. How's that monitored? Is each note accounted for, and has anyone, or yourself, ever tried to skim a few bucks from the burn pile? Bank of Canada had an interview once where they described and showed the interior. Cameras everywhere. Armed guards everywhere. Checkpoints, searches, x-rays everywhere. The risk versus reward is minimal. The most you might be able to escape with, if you're lucky, is a few bills, and the risk for that is years in prison. They also burn counterfeit bills at the same location. I do lighting for amusement parks. People generally tell me they never realized you could do that for a living. I remind them that someone has planned the lighting for anywhere you go. Speaking of amusement parks, I'm retired from a major theme park. I worked there as a scenic painter, making everything look aged, wood grain, things like that, plus murals. A lot of people don't look at those sort of things when they visit the parks, and many presume that the faux finishes are real. I find and keep track of submarines from an airplane. I attempt to read addresses on mail that machines can't read. The narrator had always wondered what happened to the letters whose addresses were unidentifiable because of his disastrous handwriting. Now we know. Some poor bugger is squinting furiously at the envelope while cursing me and making wild guesses. Follow on comment. I write addresses on mail in full awareness that machines probably can't read it, but I get paid for it. On behalf of calligraphers everywhere, thank you for doing your job and making sure that bride who really likes the illegible modern script doesn't find half her invitations never arrived. Medical illustration. It's my job to create illustrations and animations for doctors, scientists, researchers, hospitals, medical device companies, museums, and textbook publishers that accurately represent and educate people about scientific and medical subjects. If you've ever seen an anatomical diagram at the doctor's office or an illustration in a biology book, then you've seen the work of a medical illustrator and not a fine artist. They need a medical and biological background to be able to accurately portray the required scientific information. My significant other is a horse hairdresser. She drives interstate to horse shows and competitions and plats their hair. You know those fire evacuation maps that are entirely useless because no one's going to stop and look at a map on their way out of a burning building? Yeah, I design those. You know how Legoland is full of huge models with millions of bricks? People design, build, and glue those by hand, one brick at a time. I'm a model builder for Legoland, and I absolutely love what I do. A lot of people are asking how I got into my job. It was really a right place and right time kind of thing, since Legoland was opening a new workshop near me and hiring people to fill it. I've always been a massive fan and lifelong Lego builder, so my family and friends pushed me to apply. I took a building evaluation, showed them a portfolio of stuff I'd done growing up, and they liked it, so I got a job. We have people with backgrounds in theatre, biology, literature, and even former military. Some people there weren't even Lego builders before they applied. I'm not sure what they look for in the hiring process, but I sure stuck out to them being as passionate as I am about the bricks. I was a funeral musician for quite a long time, 4 to 6 funerals a week, mainly Catholic services. I made approximately $40,000 a year just in funeral service fees. Most people know that I'm joking when I tell them I did that as a job. Basically, I show up at funerals and play or sing religious service music. I could do it almost without thinking since there are really only 20 to 25 songs or hymns that people really want to hear at a funeral. You show them a list of suggestions and they get their service music, easy peasy. The times where you got an odd request were exciting by comparison. Show up 15 minutes before, leave 10 minutes after, collect your check on the way out. It sounds pretty heartless the way I describe it, and perhaps it is a bit. That sort of mindset is needed, however, to have any shot at being able to do the job. We all developed a bit of gallows humor just to cope with the sadness of comforting mourners on a daily basis. However, you can't really know what it's like to do that job until you're actually doing it. I've sung at a funeral for 4 dead kids and their mother who died trying to protect them in a freak house fire. I showed up to sing one time for the funeral of a 20-year-old who choked to death on a sour ball. The casket was still open. Some regions of the country have open casket calling hours in the church just before the service. Another time, I sang at the funeral of a woman who had just given birth to her 2nd child. Her family members were wailing and throwing themselves at the casket. If you think you know what I mean by wailing, you probably don't know. It's a unique, haunting sound that creeps into my mind at low moments. I call it the best-worst job I'll ever have. I work in Legionella risk assessment. My job is to assess the likelihood that Legionella bacteria will grow in a water system. It largely involves explaining how someone's water isn't safe to use, and then I get called horrible things. Most places I go are schools, hospitals, and care homes. Management teams try to reduce costs while making the establishment look nice. Often, one of the first areas cut is maintenance of the water system because people don't realize just how dangerous it can be not to look after it. Legionellosis can be fatal. I work in the UK and health and safety regulations are pretty strict. The US doesn't have any regulations on Legionella. The company I worked for estimated that roughly 1/3 of pneumonia-related deaths in the USA are as a result of a form of Legionellosis. This is because Legionnaire's disease is astonishingly similar to forms of pneumonia. The US has one of the highest mortality rates from pneumonia in the developed Western world. If you want to protect yourself, you can take some basic precautions. If you live in an apartment block, find out where your hot water comes from. If you have a storage cylinder in your flat, make sure it's heated to over 60 degrees or 140 Fahrenheit. It takes 20 minutes to kill most bacteria at this temperature. If the hot water is stored communally, there isn't much you can do. If you have a combination boiler or instant boiler on your wall somewhere, you should be fine in most instances. Make sure you use all of your taps once a week. This stops water going stagnant in your pipes and prevents bacteria from growing. Make sure you clean your shower heads. This is a big one. Bacteria love to grow in lime scale and grime. If you're spraying warm water through a dirty shower, you could breathe in lots of bacteria that would love to do some nasty stuff to you. Just another way that the narrator was unaware of that the planet is trying to kill us at any given moment. The more you know, I suppose. Check those water cylinder temperatures, guys. I'm the one who watches the GPS traces for people on ankle devices. I call your police officer when you leave or cut your strap. And no, we don't literally watch the thousands of devices on our screen, we only look at the GPS traces when the system sends an alert. For a while, I worked night security at specifically abandoned buildings, one of them being a water park kids liked to sneak into in the middle of the night. Yeah, terrifying people is fun. I'm a mosquito inspector. I travel to mosquito breeding habitats, look for larvae, then treat them accordingly. Also, some adulticiding. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I organize funerals on behalf of the state for people without any family. I have to search through their homes for any information about them, and I often turn up odd or interesting stuff. There are too many stories to recount them all, but here are a couple that stand out. I had one for a guy who lived in the same flat for over 30 years. Didn't have any family and only knew his landlord and maybe one or two neighbors. Nice man, but very private, always kept to himself, is a thing I hear and it applies to this person. He had an unusual name, but I'll call him Harry Smith for the sake of the video. I searched the property, found nothing unusual, and the funeral was held with minimal attendance. A few weeks later, when his estate was being wrapped up, we discovered that Harry Smith, same unusual name, same date and place of birth, had died years earlier in a different country. How could someone have died twice? More investigation turned up the fact that Harry had a brother who had gone AWOL from the army in the 50s and never been heard from again. The real Harry had died first, and his brother must have assumed his brother's name and lived in virtual isolation for half a century. I suppose terrified of being caught. A lady who had lots of friends but no family. She told all of her friends that she had had 2 sons and a husband who'd been killed in a car crash and had never remarried. She was apparently a very friendly, caring person from all the accounts I got from her friends. In her property was a case which had the birth certificates for her sons and her marriage certificate, but I did find it odd that the death certs weren't there as well. You get used to certain behaviors, and there was something that didn't add up about that to me. I put an ad in a local newspaper where her sons were born. I don't know what I was expecting, but sometimes you just hit and hope to see if something comes back. Anyway, I got a call from one of her sons who'd seen the ad. They were both still alive and had been looking for the mother who'd walked out on them for most of their lives. It was really sad. They had so many questions which would now never be answered. I put them in touch with the friends who were also devastated to learn that they'd been lied to. Nobody ever knew why she had walked out, and now they never would. There was also the man who got eaten by cats. There was a guy who lived alone and had about 20 cats living with him. A bit of a hermit and a bit odd from what his neighbors said. He died from natural causes, we believe, in his property, but with no one to find him, the cats spent the next week or 2 eating him. By the time the police broke down the door, he was practically skeletal, but apparently still with a full head of hair. Sadly, most of the cats were caught and put down, but a few escaped and were still in the area. When I visited the property, I got talking to a neighbor and one of the cats appeared. It had such a lush, shiny coat, and the neighbor was stroking it. Of course, the neighbors only knew that the man had died and not what the cats had done. Otherwise, I doubt that they would have been so comfortable with it. I saw cats in a different light after that. The mattress where he died was still soaked in blood, and the floorboards were sodden with cat pee. It was all a bit gruesome. Then there was the school photo. I found a school photo of a boy about 8 years old in the top of a drawer of a bedside table in one property. The deceased was a man in his 50s, no known family. I could make out part of the school name on the boy's shirt, and thanks to Google I managed to get in touch with the school, which was on the other side of the country. I sent over a scan of the picture, and amazingly the person I sent it to could remember the boy, who was now in his late 20s, and what's more, knew where his mum lived. The lady from the school contacted the mum, and it turned out it was her ex-husband who had died. He had had a drinking problem and had left the country several years earlier. She and her son had no idea where he'd ended up, and in the end they brought the body back to where the man was from for the funeral, with a estranged family in attendance, which was as nice an end as possible in the circumstances. Also, I found all sorts of adult reading material and other, bedroom toys. There was a transgender male-to-female whose floor was covered in adult toys. There were also a lot of Barbies. Another was a man who was a classic granddad type, toy train sets, pictures of old aircraft, tartan blankets, everything neat and tidy, who also had an impressive stash of gay reading material. And an older lady who had a framed picture of Patrick Swayze by her bed. I thought that was sweet. The longer you do it, the more you learn that everyone is unique, even if what makes them unique is hidden from even their closest friends. Ah, good. So traumatizing people with your private bedroom interests after you pass away isn't only the domain of people with families. Darn, I thought at least if I died alone I could do so without fear of judgment from people. Oh well. I just came off the road as a semi-truck driver and going to be starting as a drive-away driver. Basically, you pick up a semi, school bus, city bus, boom truck, straight truck, coach, ambulance, fire truck, RV, or even just a normal car or truck. You pick up the keys, papers, and inspect the vehicle before heading off. You do a daily log like a normal trucker would do, but you don't carry cargo. You basically just drive across the United States and drop the vehicle off. Sleep in a hotel for 10 hours and do it again. If you don't feel like working next week, ask dispatch for a vehicle that needs to be near where your house is located. The best part is you make your own days off because you are your own boss. Tire retread. A lot of people seem to think that old worn-out tires just get thrown out. Nope. A good bit will have the tread buffed off and a new tread applied. This is especially true with big rig tires. They are super expensive and it's much cheaper to retread them. I run a mail inserting machine for the state government. The state sends out a lot of mail, like holy crap. Most of ours comes from public welfare, but there's lots of different mailers from many agencies. We had a special job about a month ago that was over 9,000 pieces, on top of our mountains of normal daily jobs. The machine I run can do about 8,500 an hour of the easiest type of mailing, which is single sheet, no barcode, and goes in the most common envelope we have. If everything is running absolutely perfectly, which it never is because the machines can get grumpy, the best I did on that job was 71,000 in a night where I stayed overtime 4 hours. We get a break every 2 and half an hour for lunch. So 71,000 was the most I ever did in a day. Typically in a shift I can run 20 to 30,000 C-fold pieces, or 15 to 20 half-folds, depending on the types of jobs there are. Extras like inserts slow things down and larger packages take longer than single sheets. So let's say you've applied for medical assistance, just as a hypothetical. Whether you're accepted or rejected, you'll get a notice in the mail about it. This notice is not mailed to you individually from the assistance office, it's bundled with thousands of other similar notices and sent to us digitally. It shows up on a big industrial printer, we have several, and the guys who run those print the files out, pile them up on carts or skids, and bring them to us inserters. We load the mailings onto the machine, which feeds the paper in, reads barcodes if the job has them, staples and folds the mail, puts in a return envelope or informational insert if need be, stuffs everything in an envelope, prints an address on the envelope, if the envelope doesn't have windows, stamps it with postage and spits everything onto a conveyor where I collect it into mail bins to put on a cart and take to the back to get pre-sorted. Sometimes the machines act up and we have to fix them. Much cursing is involved. When I started with the state, I had a traditional desk job. It was ungodly boring and I gained a bunch of weight because I did almost nothing. I'm glad I found this job because I'm an unmotivated person and this is the workout I can't skip. I only sit down on my breaks. I'm always pushing carts, picking up boxes of envelopes, reams of paper, collecting mail and lifting mail trays, dragging fresh skids off envelopes from the back. I've lost over 30 pounds in a year and haven't changed my diet or anything, I'm just always moving. Having grown up with blue-collar parents, I think I'm just happier in a blue-collar working environment. It feels more comfortable and natural to me than being in an office. Plus, I'm not on first shift anymore, so I get a pay differential and I wake up at noon. It's the frickin' bomb. I work as an activities director at an Alzheimer's unit. A lot of places just let their residents sit at their rooms and wait to die, but at my place of work, we do tons of stuff like set up concerts, host church and wine tastings. It's the most fun and rewarding job I've ever had. What I normally do, if we don't have any guests or therapy or church service coming in, is bring my guitar and play a little concert for them. If you play an instrument, it's the perfect place to play, especially because they'll love anything you play, even if you're terrible. I'll also do small exercise routines in the morning, just to get them to do arm raises, leg kicks, just stuff to get the blood flowing. The ladies at my work love to bake cakes, so what I'll do is throw a cake in the oven, just one of those do-it-yourself Pillsbury ones you can get, and when it's done, I have the residents decorate and eat them. I've even heard of some places bringing a Wii and having the residents play things like golf and tennis and stuff, but I haven't tried that. I'm too scared the residents might get a little freaked out by it all. It seems interesting though. If you want to do more physical activities, those big parachutes are excellent. Just have all the residents in a circle and throw a ball in the middle and they'll love it. Reminds me of being in grade school as well. Just throwing around an inflatable beach ball is a fun activity for them as well. I'm a culinary producer on a food TV show, which basically means we handle all the food aspects of the program. If talent puts a chicken in the oven, cameras can't wait an hour, so my team swaps out the chicken for an already cooked piping hot one, or we choose all the secret ingredients on competition shows, build those massive pantries and help hosts and judges seem more food knowledgeable. I work for an international marine salvage company on a 200-foot tugboat in the Bering Sea. We do emergency tows and response when ships have issues. Basically, it's like AAA on the ocean. I think my job is well known, but maybe people don't quite comprehend it. I make costumes for movies. Seems normal. But I had a lady from accounts, we all work in the same studio lot, come to the costume department looking for a safety pin, and she was so taken aback by us sitting at sewing machines and was greatly impressed to hear that we could indeed make clothing. Like, where do you think the clothes on screen come from? H&M?
This seems like as good a day as any to stop lurking. I'm a AmITheA biologist. A good portion of my job is recovering carcasses and performing necropsies to determine cause of death. People are often confused when they see me dragging a dead AmITheA up a boat ramp to load it onto my truck. I also get to assist with rescues of sick or injured AmITheAs, so I'm not totally surrounded by death. When my coworkers and I talk shop in social settings, we definitely get weird stares. Some days it's hard to believe I get paid to do this work.
I was a tissue recovery specialist. Basically, when people die, you don't just take their important organs. You take cornea, bones, ligaments, ribs, heart valves, and even blood vessels. All of this is done by a group of 5 to 6 people that come in a few hours after death, prep the body, cut them open, and take all the things out. Stuff and place in plastic bones, there to replace what we took. Even plastic hips. They then sew up the body with a fine stitch. I've sewn the flesh of human dead. Party animals. What's the most desperate or tragic thing that you've witnessed in a nightclub? The sole nightclub in the town of about 10,000 people in rural Yorkshire where I'd grown up, and the only place open past midnight. That place had some grim sights in it. The average age was probably about 20, but the range was usually about 15 to 60. There was a chip and kebab pizza shop inside the club, so you quite often saw people dancing with a pint in one hand and a styrofoam box of chips in the other. But the really desperate part was the revolving dance floor. I don't know why the club had this, but it was just awful. It turned into a kind of pervert's sushi bar. Just desperate men standing around the edge, beckoning and trying to dance with the girls in the middle, and when they got rejected, they'd just wait for the girl to go round a time more or two, have a bit more to drink, and then try again. I live in a university town, and there's this old guy, at least 60, maybe even in his 70s, who frequents the same bar the students do. He wears a sequined blazer, a pair of short shorts and Speedos. I don't even know why he shows up. He always looks so scared and uncomfortable. Older people at clubs actually tend to liven them up if they're comfortable and in their element. If you can go through 40 and come out the other side wanting to party more power to you. How do you do, fellow kids? We were at a nightclub, and my buddy went to the bathroom to go number 2. I realized he came back with a bouncer attached to his neck. I guess he got into a fight in the bathroom, so me and him were standing outside the club. He goes on to take out a cigarette. Keep in mind that the walls of these bars are like the stony ones, like gravel. I don't know how to explain it. The ones that have many rocks sticking out. Anyway, he leans against the wall, lights his smoke, pulls down his pants, and smears a dump down the wall. He's not done. He proceeds to rub his butt all over it, smearing the brown like Picasso. He looks at me and says, "Let's get out of here." A 6-foot-tall Swedish girl in a little black dress and heels, makeup done to the nines, dancing and projectile chucking up her way across the floor. The worst part was, people parted to let her through and then just kept dancing on the pools of upchuck. I decided I was far too sober for that stuff and I noped on out of there. I saw a girl and a guy screaming at each other. They went their separate ways. Then 10 minutes later, she was apologizing to him, but he's dismissive of her. She gets desperate, kneels in the middle of the dance floor, and starts going to town on his downstairs area with her mouth. At this point, half the crowd is cheering. He raises his arms victoriously as her girlfriends frantically try to pry her away from his rooster and this infinitely embarrassing moment. Hey, we've all been there, desperately trying to reason with our drunk idiot friends to not make literally the most humiliating and bad long-term decisions they could possibly make. Some of them are just so darn committed though, aren't they? Make better decisions, drunk friends. I'd use the term friend loosely, but I knew a guy who went up to this hot chick in a bar and said, "I will literally crap my pants right here, right now, if you'd go home with me later." She said, "Oh, go on then." And so he did, right then and right there. She did not go home with him later on. There's this regular, a guy who has to be more than 30, at a student nightclub that I frequent. He always appears to be sober and just walks around by himself, not dancing. He'll then stand behind girls and sort of stroke their legs until they notice and move away or tell him to F off. I don't think he's even attempting to pull any of these girls. I think he just gets satisfaction out of touching 19-year-old girls' bums and seeing how long he can get away with it. I don't smoke, but I was in the outside smoking area of a club talking with my friend, who did smoke, when suddenly a very attractive girl comes really close, stares into my eyes, and starts making out with me. She then releases me, stares at me, and says, "Oh yeah, I was wondering if you had a spare cigarette." I didn't, so she smiled, tapped my nose, and left, leaving me slightly confused, depressed, and very, very hard. A girl needed to wash her hair down for some reason. All of the sinks in the bathrooms were being used, so she went into the men's bathroom and proceeded to put the top of her head up against the wall of a urinal and used the urinal flush to wet her hair. I was the guy taking a tinkle to the left of her, witnessing all of this happening. I should mention I was 21 during this story. I went out with 2 girlfriends of mine to a club, and this 40-plus-year-old dude constantly hung near us all night. At one point, he came up to me and asked if they were mine, and drunk me was like, "Yeah, they're with me tonight." And he suddenly looked at me, grabbed his wallet and said, "How much for the blonde?" I've pooped in a nightclub before. That was pretty desperate and tragic. Someone walking around looking for unfinished drinks and drinking them. Plot twist, it's me when I'm already drunk, poor, and looking for free substances. A girl told me I look like Jay-Z, so I pretended to be him to get laid. She was probably on substances because I haven't been told I look like him since middle school. This girl I know was attempting to dance with this guy at a club, but she had no rhythm whatsoever, so she was just gyrating on his downstairs with her butt. It looked like she was listening to a different song. The guy ended up throwing up. I like to think it was because of her dancing and not at all the alcohol he drank. My girlfriend at the time had some friends in from out of town. She went downstairs to drink and dance with them and called me at around 1:30 to pick them up. I showed up at the club and found them dancing with each other upstairs. They were 4 pretty girls, about 23 to 25 years old each. I greeted them and then leaned against a rail and waited for them to be ready to leave. Along came a pudgy, short, disheveled, very drunk guy who leaned against the same rail. He tried to join them and dance, but they got rid of him twice. He then asked me why I wasn't trying to dance with one of them after he got rejected twice, and I said, "Just watch, I'll go home with all of them." When the bar closed at 2 a.m., I said to my girlfriend and her friends, "You all ready to go?" and left with all 4 of them, leaving the drunk bro very confused. Hetero guys going to a gay club because more women let gay guys dance with them. I saw a guy vomit in a urinal trough, pick up his false teeth from said trough and place them back in his mouth whilst searching for an E in the wee-wee and upchuck lake. He also found this last thing and placed it back in his mouth. Ugh. Once, when I was in a club and went to the loo and washed my hands, there I saw this desperate guy going to a club right in the mirror. Saw an extremely drunk paraplegic guy almost get himself beat down by the surliest butch bull dyke you've ever seen. He came up behind her and grabbed her butt, asked her for a down-under kiss. She wheeled him away like, dude, get the frick out. He came back and did the same thing again. All of her friends had to hold her back from pummeling him. He was like, frick you, B-word, I got money, and pulled a wad of cash out and started flaunting it off at her and calling her the good old C-word as loud as he could. She charged back and lunged on him. Everyone intervened. He got the wind knocked out of him was all, but I thought I was going to see the smallest little guy get his butt beat in a wheelchair. The look of despair in his face was sad when he had his money out, flashing it around. Well, he deserved it. Turns out no matter what your life experience, everyone has it in them to behave like an absolute piece of crap. Probably a good thing that everyone reined in Xena the nightclub princess so that she didn't get charged. This guy was walking around giving business cards, and if I recall correctly it said, "Please have fun with me tonight. I have a lot of skills, and I'm fun." This drunk Sheila came stumbling out of the club, and people in line started pointing at her bum. A used Johnny was hanging out the backside of her dress, and she was just parading down the street not knowing any better. Really missed the cross in Sydney. I'm a Sydney sider myself. Me and my mates like to say Jesus is really dead on the cross. Not a nightclub per se, but this one time I was at a bar and I saw this really drunk guy approach this woman, who was with a group of friends and tried hitting on her. He wasn't being creepy or anything, and she was being pretty polite about it, but after a few minutes, he peed his pants. All the girls broke into a fit of laughter, and the guy had the most embarrassed look on his face I've ever seen. He turned around and stumbled quietly back to his friends, who took him out to get him a cab. I felt so bad for him. Not a club, but at a festival I saw a girl swallow an E-pill and then minutes later she chucked up. Then her and her girlfriends started sifting through said chuck to eventually find said pill and re-eat it. At the bar with my buddies Daryl and Mike, and this really super skanky girl came up to us, falling all over herself, drunk clothes messed up, an absolute train wreck. She said to us, "So, have any of you hooked up with someone you've just met?" Me and Daryl pointed to Mike and I say, "He has the biggest eggplant among us," and then we both bolted in different directions, leaving him standing there stunned. He'd just turned around from the bar. So the night goes on, the bar closes down. We can't find him, and finally we just say screw it and leave. We get to the parking lot and he is hip deep in this girl in our car. When I went to celebrate my first summer holiday with my friends when I was 16, there were surprisingly many old retired guys trying to hit on 16-year-old girls in the clubs by trying to grind on them from behind. I was confused by feeling bad for them and finding them insanely creepy at the same time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm a lesbian, but I usually hang out with gay men. I don't understand the stereotype that we don't get along because I love these guys to death. I used to go to the clubs like 5 nights a week with my best friend and workout buddy. We found that people like watching us dance with each other in seductive ways. It got him attention from the gentlemen and me attention from the ladies. It worked out very nicely in both our favors. So we'd dance all over each other until a more gender-appropriate partner came a-knockin'. One of our straight girlfriends used to come out with us too. Let me just say that I absolutely adore her, but she had issues. She was dealing with a divorce, and she was also about a decade older than all of us and just really liked the attention she got from all these young, hot men. When she saw how my friend and I danced together, she decided it was okay for her to dance with him in the same way too. He didn't seem to mind it at first, he also is a massive attention magnet, but then she started taking it too far. She'd rip his shirt off, bite his stomach, lick his chest. I felt bad for her. She was lonely, but she was looking for intimacy in exactly the wrong place. One time I was in Pacha in New York City, in the VIP section for some reason. There was this set of older ladies there. They're probably around my age now, 28, and they'd paid the extra cash to celebrate an actuary chick's birthday. Suddenly, like halfway through the night, the bodyguards came in and kicked these girls out, so some hot young things my age can come in. I hear them exclaim, they'd let us in if we made out. Pretty sad bouncers, dude, especially messed up to kick out a paying customer on their birthdays. It really stuck with me. I still hate that place. I was at my local club last year dancing, and this man in his late 30s started dancing really close to me. So I kept moving away from him, but he kept following me. Eventually he started grabbing me and touching me, so I asked him politely at least 5 times not to touch me and kept moving away. He followed me and was rubbing his hands on my butt, so I punched him because I felt really threatened, and he would not take no as an answer. He turned around and said, "Listen, you little witch. I'm an undercover police officer and I'll arrest you for attacking an officer if you don't dance with me." I told him he was a creep and I acted in self-defense, and I got away from him long enough to tell the bouncers there was a creepy pest on the dance floor harassing 20-year-old girls and pretending to be a cop. I kinda came here expecting to find funny drunken hookups, idiocy, and stories that people would be mocked for in their friend circles for the rest of their lives, but I'm mostly just getting reminded at how many gross, skeevy guys there are out there. Yuck. Karaoke bar a couple of years back. I was there with a friend that everyone in the venue thinks is my girlfriend. She's not. Someone gets up and sings. They're reasonable, above average for the place, but every time the song has a break in it, they say, "Check me out on MySpace, look up, username, download my tracks." So that's the answer to the question. Someone trying to self-promote their meh music in a karaoke bar and plugging their MySpace account in 2013. But what happened next was hilarious. I turn to my friend and you say, "You know what would be hilarious if the next person got up and said, 'I hope one day to be half as good as they think they are.'" I wasn't serious, she thought I was. We got called up next and said it. Half the place laughed and the other half thought, "Oh my god, did she just say that?" The 30 to 40-year-old guys hitting on girls that could be as young as 14. Yep, the bars across the river from where I live are 18 plus, yet they're notorious for letting in people as young as 14 as long as they had plausible ID. These guys also look the same. Fancy jeans, watches, polos with the collar popped. Also of note, the guys who film girls dancing. These guys don't work for the club either. I saw one guy get tossed from a club for this. I once heard a girl say to a friend of hers, "You should definitely make out with him, he'll give you a free drink." It's not what happened at the club, it's what happened after. We all went back to my buddy Will's house with a few girls. I didn't invite any of them back, but the girls seemed to like me a little more than the guy they came back with. Throughout the wee hours of the morning, he started getting a bit bothered by it. Finally, when we all went to bed and I was cuddling with one, his drunk butt walks out of his room and yells, "Why the frick is no one cuddling with me?" I think I just about died. That's a great way to make it happen, bro. My boyfriend went to get some drinks. Another guy came up to me at the bar, and the first thing he told me was that he was a virgin and asked if I could be his first. He was desperate as heck. Didn't even tell me his name or nothing. Just asked to do the nasty. It was kind of funny and pathetic. You know, I bet that line works for him. I had a friend who did something similar and said it worked 1 out of 10 times. Many years ago, a group of us, 4 couples, totaling 8 people, went to Hammerjack's, which is a very popular club in Baltimore at the time. We went to see a big-name group that was performing there. It was a few hours away, so we were staying at a hotel somewhat near the bar that night. All of us were sitting at the bar during the show. We got there early and got 8 seats in a row at the bar. Sometime during the night, a girl jumped up on the bar and started dancing. Hammerjack's was the kind of place where this wasn't discouraged. People just pick up their drinks to clear the dance floor and let her go. She was wearing a short skirt and didn't mind that it slid up her thighs a bit as she danced. Guys were whooping and hollering at her, and the more they did it, the wilder she danced. She thrived on the attention she was getting. The corner of the bar was a few seats down from me, and she danced 10 or so feet down one side, then rounded the corner and came 10 feet or so up our side. Back and forth, back and forth. Then she started doing sexy, flirty moves in front of any man that whooped the loudest. I was pretty lit by this time, and I enjoyed the show, but at the same time I was a bit surprised it was happening, and happening right in front of me. Then the undies came off. Our corner of the bar went absolutely frickin' nuts. The whooping and hollering turned into clapping and whistling, and she just loved it. Back and forth she went, and when her skirt would fall to where it should be, she'd pull it up a bit so the lower part of her butt cheeks would be out for the shaking. By this time, we were out of our minds laughing, yelling, whooping, and whistling. It was unbelievable. But she wasn't done yet. The girls we were with weren't happy with the show, but 2 of the guys in our group weren't in a committed relationship with their date yet, so they didn't give a rat's butt what they thought. They were a lot more interested in the chick dancing on the bar, who I should mention was pretty hot, 8 out of 10. Now comes the part that actually shocked me. Obviously, guys were trying to touch her as she danced by, and I guess she chose the special ones, because the next thing she was doing was a dancing squat on the bar while riding guys' fingers. Yep, you heard that right. Then she'd stand up and dance down the bar. Guys saw what she was doing and allowing and put their hands on the bar with a few fingers in the air, and she'd dance over their hands and sink down on their fingers. But not every guy, just a select few. She had scruples, I guess. One of my buddies, sitting right next to me, was one of them. Like I said, this was a long time ago, but I'll never forget the look on his face as she was doing the 3-finger squat on his hand, and he looked at me with a crap-eating grin as he was shouting, "Yeah, yeah!" with everyone else in our corner. Hammerjacks. Good times. Too bad it closed a few years ago. What in the surreal, ever-loving frick? I can imagine that if they allowed or even encouraged evening entertainment like that, then there were probably any number of reasons why they were closed down. I've never seen an encounter like this, and I hope I never do. There's a little corner bar near my place, generally very low-key and friendly. There is some old guy who shows up every Friday night on his rascal in his Colonel Sanders tux and his Elvis shades. He makes his way between all the tables where the women are. They always kind of giggle, and I just kind of thought they found him charming and cute. Turns out he tends to make comments about down-under kisses and how his joint still works, and he just needs a 20-year-old woman to work him over. Everyone I've talked with thinks he's really creepy, and they all try to go the other way when they see him coming. Who knew? The craziest thing I've ever had happen in a club was someone finding me attractive. There was this dude that was trying to get my attention for the longest of time, but I wasn't interested, so I ignored him. Near the end of the night, me and the guys were dancing, and I didn't notice said dude dancing behind me on the Go-Go Boy stage. And homeboy had the nerve to teabag me and then try to play it off like he was joking. Now that I think about it, it's kinda funny, but I was annoyed when it happened. There's this absolute toilet of a venue that I frequent that's notorious for this kind of garbage. I walked in there once with a bunch of mates for a 21st. Off to one side of the bar, kind of out of the way, I saw this bloke sitting in an armchair whilst a girl straddled him with her shirt off, rubbing her chest in his face. Keep in mind, this isn't an exotic dance club, so this was out of the ordinary. Being half cut, I immediately charged over to the guy, who was waving his arms around like he was suffocating, and high-fived his outstretched arm. The girl turned to look at me, tears running down her face, and said, completely sober, "Please don't encourage him, this is already humiliating enough." I had no idea how to respond, so I wandered off to look for my mates. By the time I found them and told them what happened, the guy and girl were gone. She left her bra behind though, and a fat bald bloke had wrapped it around his head. At least, I assume it was hers, he might have bought it himself. Overall, an odd night. When did you think you were about to die in your own home? Someone walked past my window, which might not have been that weird except I'm on the 8th frickin' floor. I almost had a cardiac. Apparently there were renovations being done on the building, and they were building the scaffolding up to my level. There's a state prison less than a mile away from my house. When I was 18, my family was out of town. My dad called the house saying someone had escaped from the prison and to lock all the doors and have something handy to protect myself with, which I did. It was at night and I turned on the police scanner. He was incarcerated for the unspeakable act with over a dozen teenage girls. I looked out the window in the back door just in time to see a man in an orange jumpsuit jogging through my backyard, stop, see me, and start walking towards my back door. Next thing I knew, police ran into him and tackled him. One of the most terrifying moments of my life. This was back when we still had a landline at my house. Ours was the very last one on the line, so it sometimes did funny things like ring for no reason or just drop a call in the middle. One night I was home alone and it started to storm really bad, and the phone rings. I pick up and it's the woman from 911 asking why I called. I say, "I didn't call 911. I've just received a call from this number. Are you home alone?" "Yeah, no one could have made that call." "Are you sure? Would you like me to send a car?" In my head, I was thinking, God, yes, come save me. But I said, I don't think so. I really didn't call. Okay, ma'am. Have a good night. I sat on my couch with my dog and didn't move till my parents came home. It freaked me the frick out. In short, on a dark, stormy night, my phone called 911 by itself. For people saying they would have sent a car out anyway, 1, I live at the end of a very long private drive, so they very well could have sent one by and I wouldn't have known it. 2, this was only the first time it happened, and the second time they actually did send someone. I mean, having your house's weird phone lines get you blocked from the emergency services line because there were too many non-urgent calls seems like it could be a really bad thing in the long run. What a strange phenomenon. When I was about 8, my bedroom was full of windows with no blinds. One day I heard something outside, but I was too scared to go to the window to see. The next day I went outside and there were footprints in the snow around my windows. For the next week or so, I'd refused to sleep in that room. So every morning when my mother got up, she'd find me asleep under the living room table. One night as I was under the table, I heard someone at the back door. They were jiggling the doorknob trying to get in. I ran into my mother's room screaming and she called the police. Sure enough, the same shoe prints were at the back door. The police said there had been a bunch of break-ins in the area. In short, someone was stalking my house when I was 8. When I was a young lad, staying with cousins in the Dales, in Oregon, in a quasi-rural area, we had a huge yard and the nearest house was maybe a quarter mile away. Anyway, the 5 of us kids were out playing after dark. The idea was that one person would go and hide and the other 4 would count and then come find the hidden person, who would then try to run back to base without being tagged. My oldest cousin, who was perhaps 12, hid and the rest of us set out in different directions as per usual. Someone yelled, "I see him," and we all come running and give chase. The chase does not go in the direction of the base, however, but towards a bunch of trees. The 4 of us more or less had the trees surrounded when my cousin came out from another direction. Once he appears, the person cornered in the trees headed towards the road. We found out the next day that the neighbors had someone break into their house. In short, me and 3 other 8 to 10-year-olds cornered someone who was probably a burglar, thinking he was it in a game of tag. Luckily, I wasn't alone for mine. Me and my wife were at one of her friends' houses. It was about 10 at night when the doorbell rang. We all stop talking and stare at each other. I ask if anyone has ever come over this late or if she was expecting someone. She said no. So I go to the front of the house and look out at the window and don't see anyone. So I open the door and there's a mutilated dead squirrel right on the welcome mat. We turned on the floodlights on the house and looked around but didn't see or hear anyone. It freaked all of us the frick out and we never found out who did it or why, but just assumed it was some jerk kid. I grew up on a ranch about 10 miles from the nearest town. One of our favorite things to do in the summer was to spread out a few sleeping bags in our backyard and have campouts. We had a huge dark activated light attached to our barn that we'd turn off with a high-powered flashlight to tell ghost stories and try to scare each other. One night I had 2 of my friends over for a campout. We shut off the barn light and sat in complete darkness. If you haven't been out in the country, it might be hard to appreciate exactly how pitch black it can be. We were talking in those low, scary story voices. One of my friends was in the middle of her story, probably the one about the serial killer licking that girl's hand, when she just stopped short. She said, "Who's that?" and pointed up the road. We all looked and saw what she was talking about. You could barely make out the figure, certainly the silhouette of a person walking down the road. That was unusual enough, but the way this person was walking was what was unsettling. The figure was standing straight up and was walking in such a stiff and unnatural way that he or she could have been marching. We couldn't make out any other defining features of the figure. After watching and having a whispered debate on what to do, we decided the best course of action would be to shout at the figure. I screamed, "Who are you?" at the top of my 12-year-old lungs. One of my friends pointed the flashlight at the figure, but it was too far away to distinguish any features. The figure did hear us and just sort of turned around, walking in that particular way. We watched until they were out of sight, and then we woke up my parents. I still have no idea who he or she was or what they were doing way out in the country. I went downstairs to get some water at about 2 a.m. In the kitchen, we've got a clock on the wall. As I walk into the room, acutely aware of every creak that echoes around the house surrounding me, I heard the fast wind of something mechanical. As I glanced slowly to my left, subconsciously grabbing my glass a little tighter, I see the clock hands on the wall spinning at about 50 times the normal speed. Around and around and around. I think to myself very clearly, this is how movies start. This is it. I was ready to defend myself with my glass whilst dashing over to grab a knife. It was then that I realized we had a radio clock which automatically sets itself. I'd never seen it do that before. It was now 1 a.m. The narrator doesn't know what this contraption is and why it was resetting at 2 a.m. in particular. I think this might be a device of ages past. I'd probably have been up all night with that weapon, to be honest. This one is absolutely true. Many years ago, I lived in a big, old 3-story house that had a room on the middle level that we converted into an office. I used to write financial reports late at night that were published early in the morning. The office had a few computers, and my toddler son had been playing on one of them for most of the evening, right up until I finished work at around 9 p.m. By then, he had fallen asleep, so I switched off his monitor, scooped him up, and took him to bed, flicking off the light as I left. For the next couple of hours, I relaxed in another room watching TV with my wife. She went to bed about 11 p.m., and at midnight, I decided to do the same. I realized I'd left a window open in the office, so I went in there to close it. The house was silent and the room was pitch black dark and ice cold when I walked in. Colder than it should have been for the time of year, even with the window open. I paused for a moment in the center of the room to think about this, and then it happened. Bink, bink, bink. Something was tapping on the glass. But it wasn't the random tappings of a bird or another kind of animal. It was completely uniform. It sounded human, but I was on the second floor, so how was that possible? It was so dark, but I couldn't make anything out against the black glass. But a few moments later, it happened again. Bink, bink, bink. By now, I was already feeling on edge, and then something happened that chilled me to the core. Because out of the corner of the room, to my right, from the darkness, a high-pitched, almost squeaky voice began to speak quite loudly.
I can see you.
I froze on the spot. My blood went cold, my bowels prepared for evacuation. My God, I thought, I never wrote that book. Any book. It spoke again, but with greater emphasis on that all-important word.
I can see you.
I was determined that I was almost certainly screwed, so I figured, what the hell? I turned slowly to my right and walked into the darkness until I finally reached my son's computer. Nothing there but an empty chair. But no talking now, just silence. A horrible silence. Carefully, I reached over and switched on the monitor. The screen brightened and there it was. Something red and horrible. Once again, it tapped on the glass. It was fricking Elmo on my kid's Sesame Street game. A plain white van would creep very slowly down our street at around 2 a.m. weekly during the summer. I was 19. Our street was not a dead-end road but had residential roads at either end, preventing it from being a through street, so this van was clearly not making a route of any sort. I'd hear it and watch from my upstairs window bedroom every time it passed by. One night, my parents and brother were out of town and I was home alone, happily sleeping when I heard a car door slam out front. I jumped up to look out the window and the van was backed into our driveway. I couldn't see anyone moving around outside, but the lights were off and they were parked. I ran into the hall and crouched into a ball and tried to listen for any sounds and plan an attack or escape route. I was shaking uncontrollably. A few minutes later, I heard the engine start up and the van tore out of my driveway. I never saw it again. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. It was pretty early in the morning and I heard some weird noises downstairs. My wife was out of town with her mum, so it was just me and the cats in the house, and they were both on the bed with me, and also looked kind of freaked out. So I got up slowly and heard another loud crash and some glass breaking. I didn't own a weapon or anything at the time, so I was looking around for anything which I could use, which ended up being this brass vase thing I kept changing. I grabbed that and crept downstairs, slightly freaking out. More noises than a "ah" noise. Turns out I left the back door open and my goat wandered into the kitchen and crapped everywhere and broke a shelf. I yelled at the goat and he went back outside. I woke up in the middle of the night because my television turned on. I don't have cable, so it's all static. Then it shuts off, and I just lay there not sure of what to think. Then it turns back on, and back off again. This keeps happening, and I was about to crap myself. I start to get up to attempt to look around, and I heard a thud nearby. I bravely run to the switch to turn the lights on and investigate. The remote was trapped between my mattress and the wall, and my moving around in my sleep was pressing the power button. When I got up, it released the remote and it fell to the ground, causing the thud. I'm glad you're more inquisitive than I am, because I think I would have just moved back in with my family and flat out abandoned my house if that happened. It's not worth the risk when the horror movie symptoms start coming up that strong. My sister had some friends over watching horror films, and I was out LANing for most of the night. When I got back at around 1 a.m., all of the lights were off except for the television. I walked up to the back door, trying to open it silently to sneak up and yell, "Boo!" to scare them. The little craps had locked the door. Front door is never open, so my only option to get in was my bedroom window, which I could climb up a tree to access. But I wanted some revenge. I went up to the front door, which is a massive oak thing with a big brass knocker on the inside. Yeah, I don't understand that to this day. I slammed it a dozen times really fast and then bolted around the corner to my window. I climbed inside, hearing them chattering about trying to look out the window to see who was knocking. The door to my room was off-kilter, so it swung open slowly if unlatched, and it creaked like mad. So I turned the knob to unlatch it and stand behind the door. Crack. Dead silence from the chatter squad. My sister apparently was the bravest of the bunch because she walked in and tried to flick on the light. The switch is beside the fully opened door, so when she reached for it, I grabbed her arm. Such a scream, and the best part was that one of her friends bolted out of the house and ran home in her pajamas before she had a chance to hear the relieved sigh. Fun times last decade. One time, the floor outside my room creaked a little bit. It was probably a murderer with a knife. When I was a young lad, I could never get to sleep, so I'd just stare out of the window and look at the night sky. One night, my parents had just gone to the shop thinking that I was asleep. I got out of bed and walked over to the window, ready to stare at the sky and imagine flying to another planet. But instead of stars, I saw a face staring right at me. It had a wild look in his eyes and his hair was all scraggly and matted. I screamed in terror and dove back under the covers, but not before I saw the face disappear, its eyes widening, mouth open in horror. Half an hour later, still shocked from seeing this face, I heard my parents' car drive into the driveway. The door slammed and I heard the sound of feet crunching on gravel. I heard a scream. An ear-splitting, blood-curdling scream. Thinking my parents had seen the face too, I rushed downstairs, opened the front door, and almost tripped over a body lying on the floor. It was the face. I screamed too and walked backwards, stumbling on the step into our house and falling backwards. My dad called an ambulance and the cops ushered me and my mum into the kitchen. We were both in shock, and my dad was too. We stayed up all night. In the morning, things became clear. The man, a known unspeakable act offender, had fallen from my balcony and hit his head on the wall, killing him instantly. I never told my parents I saw the face. When I was younger, I was home alone in a house that I know was haunted. It was not uncommon to hear people walking around the house in parts where no one was staying. Doors would mysteriously open and shut themselves, and one door would always lock from the inside. One night, I was home alone. It was late and I was just watching some TV. I hear the all-too-familiar noise of a door shutting and then footsteps of someone coming up the stairs to the main floor. I look, expecting to see my parents, but there were none. The footsteps then continued to walk right past me and then proceeded to walk up the stairs to the top floor, with the door at the top of the stairs shutting. I freaked the frick out, technical term, and shouted, "Is anyone there?" To which I hear a whispered response in my ear of, "No." Needless to say, I ran the frick out of the house. I live in the woods of Canada, about 8 kilometers outside the town of Bragg Creek. I've been a city boy all my life, so adapting to the difference of living in nature has been an adventure. The silence, the absolute inky blackness of moonless nights, the way the trees surrounding the house are turned into a bright duotone of black and blue, casting impossibly long, mournful shadows on nights where the moon is out. But the beauty of daytime has made adapting relatively easy, and I was surprised at how quickly I was growing accustomed to my new surroundings. Then one night, a month into living there, I was awakened by something in the middle of the night. My heart pounding, and with that sense it was a noise that you can almost remember that woke you up. I was alone. My girlfriend had spent the night in town with friends, and it was so dark I couldn't see my hand an inch in front of my face if I tried. I lay awake, hearing the breeze rustle the leaves faintly outside the open window, when a nearly indescribable, lingering scream erupted in the night. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding like a beast trying to escape my chest. Again, the scream cuts through the night, starting my mind racing. What the frick is that? Insane explanations flew into my mind. Is it a woman? A monster? An injured animal? A fricking alien? 4 or 5 times more, the scream pierces the silence, mostly getting further from my home. I got up and closed the window and crazily went back to sleep. The next morning, I emailed my neighbor about an acre away to see if they heard the same thing. He had, and he knew what it was. Apparently, it was the sound of a mother cougar calling her cubs, and that call is famous for sounding like a woman in distress. I haven't heard it since. I walked in on my roommate once who was tickling his pickle to a video of old people doing the deed. What has been seen cannot be unseen. Yeah, although not quite in the spirit of some of the other stories we've had here, that one would certainly be its own kind of haunting, wouldn't it? I can certainly see myself moving after that one. When I was younger, maybe 13 to 14, my sister and I were home alone. We lived in a very rural area on a dirt road, and the nearest neighbor was over a mile away. We were instructed to not open the door for anyone, no matter what. So we're just hanging out, playing video games, watching TV, among other things, and the dogs started barking. We heard the distinctive sound of a vehicle door closing. Next thing we know, someone is banging on the door. We went to peek outside the windows, and there was this guy we'd never seen before out there. So we just sat in the corner, peering out of the window, trying to be very quiet and hoping he'd just go away. Then, out of nowhere, this freak tries to open our door, which is of course locked. Well, we really start to panic, and he could probably hear us crying and saying stuff like, "Oh my god, what if he breaks in? Get the phone!" He's obviously getting more and more annoyed because he just keeps shaking the door harder and trying to twist the locked doorknob. Then, all of a sudden, he just stopped. He walked back to his truck, got in, and left. We, of course, immediately called our parents, and all of this led to my dad getting 2 German shepherds and a chain-link fence. We still to this day have no fricking clue what he wanted or why he tried to get into our house. We're just really thankful he didn't. I can still feel the fear trying to reassure myself that this one wasn't real. So here we go. July 2009, I was spending some time at my parents' farm in upstate New York. We have a lot of land, but no animals. The farm across the road has cows, but at this time they were penned up and what I saw definitely wasn't bovine. Around 6 p.m, my parents left for Cape Cod, repeating every rule and precaution that they could muster as I ushered them out the door. One last reminder to put food and water in the barn before it was too dark. We keep the door cracked open and leave water for the wild cats that keep the mice population at bay. Excited for the soon-to-come Faptoberfest, I forgot everything I was supposed to do. It wasn't until around 8 p.m. that I started to hear a barely audible crying from outside. It wasn't human, but it still had that strange whimper that drew my attention. I flicked the porch lights on and checked out the window. There was a small black cat that, when I opened the door, limped across my back lawn in the direction of my barn. The door was now closed, and as strange as this seemed to me, I was more uneasy than scared. I figured my dad must have put something away and left it. I walked down my driveway, peered into the dark room, and heard what sounded like gasps for air. Now completely freaked out and discouraged by the fleeting light, I turned around and ran towards the house. Not 2 steps later, I hear shattered glass on the back of the barn, and I freeze. What walked towards me was a dark brown animal, no larger than a fox, that started bounding towards the closest trees. It zigzagged to the edge of the long grass, then stood up and waded through the woods. I still to this day have no idea what it was, but the broken window was blamed on me, and my sighting was never explained. And the final nail in the coffin, 2 of the cows, which were freaking huge, were found with their necks torn open while they were still inside their pen. Everyone on my road blamed coyotes, but to this day I know it was something else. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.